Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Scottish Police Authority meeting here at COSLA in Edinburgh. I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Roughead, our CFO, who's been with us for just about 2 months now. So, Sarah, this is your first authority meeting, so well done, and thank you very much for being here, and look forward to working with you over the coming months and years. So, thank you. And I have a piece of sad news. I want to begin by expressing my condolences on the death of Andrew Flanagan. Andrew was chair of the Scottish Police Authority between September 2015 and December 2017. And I know that both Mary and Tom have worked closely with Andrew during that time, as well as some staff, colleagues in Police Scotland and Forensic Services. And our thoughts are with Andrew's wife, Virginia, and his family at this time. So moving on to our routine business. So we have no member apologies. And as people know, it's a requirement of our code that members declare any financial or other interests and connections in relation to the business for today's meeting. Can members confirm if there are any declarations of interest or connections? No. Members, is there any other business that you want to raise? No. And in accordance with section 20 of our standing orders, I'm asking members to confirm that they're content to take the following item in private today, which is item 12, private minute of the items taken in private at the meeting held on the 25th of September. Are members content to take this in private? Yes. So moving on to the minute from the previous meeting, the minute held on the 25th of September for approval. Does anyone have any comments? And if we have no comments, can members approve the draft minute of our last meeting? Yes. And then we have one action on the log, which is to propose to close. Are members content to close this action? Yes. So since our last meeting in September, there have been no decisions taken via correspondence. So I'll now move on to the substantive items on the agenda. So first of all, we have my report. I'll take it as read, but there were a couple of areas that I wanted to highlight. One was the Digital Justice and Policing Conference, where we had the opportunity to listen to how digital technology is beginning to influence and the impact it can have on improvement to the justice system, both in terms of efficiency and improved outcomes. So that was very interesting, and I think there's no doubt in the coming months and years the use of digital will play an increasing role. I know that Police Scotland and Forensics Services already do use that to good outcomes for the justice system, but increasingly we will be relying on that. So that was good. It was good to see strong authority and Police Scotland presence there in terms of input into that. And then I was delighted to be with our COSLA colleagues at their annual conference. I inputted into a panel on civility in public life, which was incredibly interesting. It's been something that COSLA are very keen to promote, and of course it's wider than straightforwardly civility in public life. It's, I think, about community cohesion and improved outcomes for communities. So that was an important piece of work that COSLA are leading, and we're one of their strategic partners in that, so I was pleased to be there. So I'm happy to take any questions that board members may have. Polly?
Chair, many thanks for your report. Could you say a bit more about paragraph 8.9, the APCC and NPCC Partnership Summit, where the issue of how AI might be used to add value in policing?
So that was a really interesting session. A couple of areas that were shared. One of them was how Bedfordshire are looking at how to integrate, analyse and visualise data to enhance operational decision making. And there was another force that used AI to reduce their overtime bill by in the region of 10 to 15%. So there's no doubt it can transform the way things are moving. I think a number of services also are using it to transform public contact to police services for non-emergencies. And what was interesting was the general sense within the room, and the Chief Constable was also at the conference, was that we're perhaps at the foothills, and AI and policing and the justice system can really make a huge difference to where we're going. And the Police Chief's Science Advisor also highlighted that the use of AI will be challenging, so there are ethical issues, but there's also resourcing. But the structure of the data that policing holds doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. So I think it's about moving forwards and embracing it, but making sure that we get positive outcomes. Thank you. Alistair, will you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report. I see that you recently met with representatives from the Metropolitan Police and you had a discussion around their use of live facial recognition. I wonder if you could just expand upon your report and tell us what your main takeaways from that meeting were.
So that was interesting, of course. The Met were up, I think, here in COSLA, being part of the conference that we had last summer. So that was very helpful. Scott Ross and Katerina were with me when we visited London, and we met with the NCA as well as attending the conference, and then with the Met. And they talked about their sign-off processes. So they had been very thoughtful about how to use live facial recognition. There was oversight from the Mayor's Office for policing and crime, and strong engagement with local authority or local council areas prior to deployment, and really making it clear with the community, looking at communication that they needed to put out in public, how the watch list was created and how their complex methodology divides the Met into hexagons, looking at crime hotspots and where they could deploy it. So quite a lot of, there was clearly professional judgment, but also a lot of thought went into what led to the deployment, to the benefit and keeping communities' safety. They talked about, out of a very high number of alerts, only 10 false positives with almost 1,000 arrests. So, huge improvement in community safety as a consequence of this, but recognising it wasn't necessarily an easy path to take forwards. And I think, as you know, through our PPC work, the rights-based pathway that we're carrying out and the thoughtfulness that Police Scotland are putting in, I had a confidence that how we are progressing with that in Scotland was appropriate. Tom?
Thank you, Chair. You met with some of our diversity staff associations, and I welcome that. And talking about further discussions, are these regular meetings? What value do you get from them? A number of years when I first came onto the authority, our BME colleagues expressed their concern that they weren't getting their voice heard sufficient enough in getting access to leadership, both the policing and to the SPA, in the way it had historically. We put a lot of effort into that, but I know in your report, those BME associations are not specifically mentioned.
So they absolutely are part of my programme of engagement with our diversity staff associations, as well as our trade unions and the statutory police associations. So that whole commitment about valuing our workforce, being engaged and skilled, and also being a learning organisation and listening to what people have to say. So clearly we have our governance arrangements around it, and I know that as Chair of People Committee, but I know that People Committee and wider have oversight of this. But for me, the triangulation is important, so listening to the direct feedback, and certainly from all of our groups, so whether it's our diversity staff associations or our trade unions or the statutory authorities, they have the feedback I get is they feel now they have access to the senior leadership team and they're being listened to. They very much enjoy the engagement with myself, but what's very helpful is, so clearly it's good to hear what's good about what's happening, but they also, I think, guide our thinking about where we perhaps need to look a bit harder, where the progress isn't going quite as well as they would have hoped to have. So I think it's just part of that array of engagement with our associations to make sure that we are continuing to go in the right direction. But I very much value the time that the associations give to come and meet with myself and Chris, and that makes such a difference. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. If I can just get DCC Spears to add in terms of the discussion in relation to the impact that we can see of having that close relationship with the diversity staff associations.
And it's a really important observation, Tom, that you've made. So we definitely recognise that the diversity staff associations are vitally important. We now would consider them as mandatory consultees in all the developments of our policies and practices. And one of the ways in which we can bring them together is through a collaboration group which meets on a monthly basis. It's co-chaired between Policing Together and our HR function. But they've made a huge contribution in shaping some of our policies. So when I think about Stop and Search, I think about the work we've done around sex and gender. I think about the work that we've done to develop the inclusion calendar. They have played a really, really vital part in all of that. So we are really committed in that space. And beyond that collaboration group, as members of the executive, we would meet monthly with different groups and take on board all the comments. So it's really, really important in how they shape and help us develop policy.
That's really helpful, thank you. And certainly that, in terms of my triangulation, that's what they tell me. They say that, in recent years, they've seen a real improvement in that engagement and the impact it's had. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
So I'm now going to move on to our committee chairs' reports, and I'll ask each committee and group chair to talk about the report and then invite any questions that members may have. And I'll start with Commonwealth Games Oversight Group. Alistair.
Thanks very much. I'll take the report as read. Police Scotland, they want to help deliver a safe, secure and successful Commonwealth Games, and one in which there is no financial detriment to Police Scotland. We got a very thorough briefing from the Gold Commander, who outlined along with his team the areas that they've been focused on and working on. I think a couple of takeaways from it is that Police Scotland have a very strong track record in delivering major events, and we were interested to see the learning from previous events, how it's feeding into the planning here, and we felt reassured that that certainly was taking place. And in terms of no financial detriment, we welcomed that the minute of agreement for the planning stage has now been signed off, and the first invoices have been submitted, and they're very close to getting the minute of agreement in place for the delivery stage, working towards that. And just a final comment to make is, out with the meeting, I know that there is the HMI are doing a strategic review of policing the Commonwealth Games in 2026. They've spoken to me as the chair of this oversight group, and I look forward to their work coming forward in the future.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from board members? No, in which case I'll go on to Forensic Services Committee and Paul Eadie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pick out three things because I'm conscious we've got the Director's report on the agenda as well, where we can maybe go into a bit more depth than anything. Just three things I wanted to home in on. Firstly, across the board, generally good performance, and the in-house drug driving seems to be going very well. We had a good, clear report up from Police Scotland about the roadside testing rollout, and that seems to be funded as well. So members, I think, were assured on that. The second thing is in digital forensics. We took the decision to pause pursuit of ISO 17025, and that was to allow Police Scotland to get a better handle on this area of work. I think they've had challenges with workforce and other things. And this pause, there's no risk to this because we don't have it at the moment. So this allows them to address that more effectively. And the last thing, which was in the private papers, was the strategic workforce plan. We had a good paper up on that, and that will come to the public session of the board, of the committee early in the new year. I think it's February. And that was a much better alignment with what we wanted to do. So we're looking forward to getting that approved in the new year. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any comments or questions? No, so I'll move on to Legal Committee and Chris Cregan.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously I'll take the report as read. I'd particularly draw attention to a couple of things. Firstly, we welcome the establishment of an employee relations organisational learning group to consider learning from employment tribunals, grievances and so on. And we've asked to hear more about the work of that group in future and how the learning is being applied in practice. Secondly, and also focused on learning in the organisation, we welcomed a report on public and fatal accident inquiries being serviced by Police Scotland, including the way in which lessons are being captured and cascaded through its organisational learning framework. And on that matter, we're seeking to understand more about the resourcing implications of work in this area and the impact of ongoing and future spend on operational policing. And we've asked for a further report at a future meeting of the committee to consider that further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Comments or questions? Katarina?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris. I'm not sure if this is a question for yourself or maybe for Police Scotland, but your report makes reference to an employee relations organisational learning review group, which has been instituted to look at the outcomes, I suppose, of employment tribunals, etc., and just understand learnings. So my question is just around the membership of that, whether it includes staff side as well, and what you're hoping to achieve with that. Because looking at that, you kind of go, oh, of course, naturally it makes sense. So just really keen to understand a bit more about that.
Thanks for the question. So that brings together the HR function, it brings together the legal function, it brings together the professional standards function. So it's looking at the key business areas because we reckon there are common themes that would cut across that. As we go forward, we are looking at how do we take the team that would have led on best value, because that very much at the heart of best value is about learning. We've also got a continuous improvement team. So in the first instance we brought together, I would suggest the kind of key functions that cut across grievances, complaints, internal matters that are referred, and trying to draw those common themes. But critically for that team will be their ability to work with divisional commanders, heads of departments, because largely we need to then embed that learning. So I'm confident we've got the right people in the room, and certainly I think Chris has looked to get more detail on that, and we'll bring that back to the committee. Thanks.
Thank you.
Chair,
sorry.
could I just add one more thing to that? So I suppose when we think about learning, we think about a challenge around employment and discrimination, and how that forms future practice and policy. I can think of a couple of examples recently where we've been successful, and that has helped us in terms of shaping our policies. So I wouldn't want everybody to be left with the impression that we are always the individuals or the organisation that has been failed an individual on occasions. We've been deemed by the tribunal to be correct in our actions. I think that's important to make that point. Thank you.
Chief, I think that is very important. I think it's important in terms of really looking at learning and improvement, which is obviously part of the function of the authorities to support policing in terms of improvement, is learning from successes as well as, if you use the word failure. And I think doing it in that open and transparent way can sometimes be challenging, because although we all want to be a learning organisation, there's sometimes such polarisation and criticism. So I think I commend Police Scotland for doing this and taking it forwards. I hate to speak for one of my board member colleagues, but I think the question was, where is the role of the trade unions and the staff associations in this? So maybe when it's been reported back to the legal committee, it could include that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. We recognise that they have got a role, and we are engaged in that space, so we can bring that back.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to audit risk and assurance with Mary Pickethley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, at this meeting we had, as usual, a number of internal audit reports. This month we had reports on overtime, on the environment and sustainability, and on complaints management. And the summary of the meeting gives some detail of the issues that were discussed in relation to these items. As always, the internal audit reports are very useful in terms of letting us see what's happening within the service. But across the committee papers, there was the committee felt there was a theme of increasing backlogs and difficulties in achieving deadlines, whether that was for meeting recommendations from audits or inspections, or dealing with complaints or FOIs. Now, this is despite a number of officers and staff coming along and telling us about the efforts that were being made to address those backlogs and the continuing work that was being put into getting back on track. And we simply wanted to highlight the need for those efforts to be supported and resourced so that, you know, we can get back to a situation where there is less concern about some of these matters. The committee also highlighted the need for a greater focus on improvement planning and asked for the team to be reminded that it's everyone's job in the team to make sure that these matters are addressed and that it's not left to one or two people. So basically we've asked for regular reports to committee confirming the progress that's being made in relation to these backlogs, but also we're asking that progress is made at pace so that we can get back on track. That's everything I wanted to say in relation to that committee. Chair, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Any comments or questions from Amy? No, so we're moving over to complaints and conduct with Katarina Kasper.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee met on the 13th of November, and as usual, we considered a number of standing items, and I take my report as read. Just following on from what Mary was saying, there is one subject that the committee wanted to draw to the board's full attention, and that's particularly in relation to performance of the non-criminal complaints. So it has been reported previously that there is a substantial number of complaints that fits into this category, which are yet unallocated for investigation. And we also know that this area has been an area of focus and investment over at least the last 12 months, but actually we've been talking about this far longer than that, which included the addition of about 25 or more civilian investigators. And we know that this is managed via a Silva command structure, so there is a fair bit of management attention on this. And whilst we have been given assurances that the measures which have been put in place have increased the productivity of the team, we were also conscious of the fact that there is ongoing activity in terms of improving further efficiencies, etc., etc. Despite all of this, we're not really seeing the overall number of unallocated criminal complaints reducing at a meaningful rate to give the committee that assurance, that confidence that the backlog will be eliminated and that the organisation will reach a steady state where all of the complaints are allocated and investigated within the expected timelines. Now, again, we do understand that the PSD department is experiencing high demand across all areas of its responsibility, and of which complaints, and particularly the non-criminal complaints, form only one small part. But that's an explanation, that is not an excuse. And in the summer, to get a little bit more into the skin of what's going on, Police Scotland and the ASP commissioned an internal audit into complaint handling. That report has been issued at the end of October. It was discussed at the Audit and Risk Committee in November. In February, it will be coming to the Complaints and Conduct Committee. And as a committee, we have asked that as part of that audit and the plan to address the recommendations of the audit, that we have a very clear path to green sort of planning where we understand the resourcing assumptions, we understand the volume, the demand assumptions, and we just have that timeline that we can start holding Police Scotland accountable for. So understand it's hugely complex, understand there's lots of effort, but I think we're just at a stage where we need to see the impact of that effort being translated into a reduction in the backlog on a sustainable basis.
Thank you. Chief, would you like to comment?
Thank you. And we anticipated this would be a point of discussion, and it's something that DC Spears and I have spent some time in the last couple of weeks discussing. So we absolutely accept that trust and confidence in policing is in part achieved by our response to complaints from the public. But when I look closely into this, it strikes me that there is a disproportionate effort currently having to be applied in relation to some of these public complaints, which, while important and clearly important to the individual, when set in the scale of demand on the organisation, are relatively minor. So Alan and I have been discussing this, and in the next few weeks, we've got a meeting with Laura Paynton, who's the new head of the PERC. I think some of the answer to this lies in terms of developing some work with the PERC and their expectation Their guidance is very specific, but I think what it currently does is overlays a disproportionate demand on us when you look across the broader complaints demand and then the demand on the organisation as a whole. So, you know, I think you've probably looked at this in detail. It's clear we need to do something significantly different, and currently putting additional resource into this is not going to be the answer when set against other threat and risk and demand that we're facing. So I hope that reassures you that we've got a plan or we've got an approach, but it is going to need some strong cooperation between ourselves and the PERT, but we'll be able to report that in due course. Thank you.
Okay, you want to come back, Katrina?
Very much, Chief Constable. I really, really appreciate this, and you know, and I am reassured by the fact that you are taking a really, you know, high level perspective on this and really thinking about how can we fundamentally do this differently, because you know I've you know fully, for all it's worth, this is maybe my personal opinion rather than the committee's opinion, but I fully agree with you that the response to complaints needs to be proportionate. And if a change in approach is required, then that is absolutely something that, you know, the committee would be looking at. And if we are assured that that's the right way and the stakeholders are involved, then, you know, so I think everybody here is really just interested in complaints being allocated a proportionate level of effort and then closed off when it's reasonable to close them off. And, you know, and so, yeah, so I really welcome this really fresh perspective. So thank you for that.
And not necessarily for an answer today, and it maybe is for the Complaints and Conduct Committee. I think I'm hearing that working harder is not necessarily the answer. It's maybe a change in methodology and approach so that we can continue to maintain high levels of public confidence and have appropriate responses to people's concerns. Yeah.
Just one further point, Chair. Clearly, we'll seek cooperation and collaboration with the PERC, but one of my considerations was to look across other public sector organisations and their approach. And again, what you see is a disproportionate requirement, I think, on policing. But I take you back to my first point. Absolutely accept and understand that this is key in relation to trust and confidence. But maybe something more proportionate and quicker is the best solution. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. I'm moving on to Tom Halpin with the People Committee.
Thank you, Chair. It's a short report. This is an area of consideration that the People Committee undertake in terms of pension forfeiture. In the interest of transparency, these cases are private and would be clearly sensitive to be discussed in that context. But it's important that the public understands that the ability for those who, because of criminal conduct, have a fundamental cause a breach of trust in policing, there are consequences in pension forfeiture is at the most serious end of the scale in terms of what this organisation can exert. So there was a meeting, there was 2 cases considered, and that will be determined in due course. There will be a further meeting of the People Committee in the 4th of December, and the wider consideration will be reported after that.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to Pauline Howie with Resources Committee, please.
Thank you, Chair. We had a detailed discussion about the Q2 financial position and the risks to the forecast, and that's an agenda item later today. We commended the further enhancement of the transformation and benefits reporting and welcome the further work in progress to develop this reporting so that we can clearly show how benefits, costs and risks are moving over time since original business cases have been approved. This is a huge transformation programme, and the committee welcomed the work progressing across the whole of the programme in order to deliver the 2030 vision. We also had a very useful update on the Estates Master Plan, and this is now going to be reported to at quarterly basis to each Resources Committee. We also discussed the governance arrangements around the Estates Master Plan and the role of the SPA in relation to the governance arrangements. We welcomed further work that is ongoing to enhance internal and external communications around this significant investment, which is not only about improvement to the estate, but also a key enabler for delivering the 2030 vision.
Thank you very much indeed. Any comments or questions? And Katerina.
Thank you very much. So the oversight of transformation in benefits, and again, this may not be for police, maybe more for Police Scotland, but what I noticed is, members noted progress to date and considered projects that had been post or were red RAG rated. And what I suppose where I'm seeking assurance on is that there is a degree of accountability within the organisation for projects which are post or RAG rated. And, and I suppose, the reason why I'm asking is because, again, we're all fully aware of the tight financial environment. We're fully aware that by the time a project is in flight, there's already been significant resource which has been allocated to it. So for some projects then to be post or kind of be so substantial behind the plan that they're red RAG rated, the question arises, around what's the accountability for that within the organisation?
Thank you for the question. So yes is the short answer. There is absolutely accountability. I think probably for the first time we are making some really difficult decisions around prioritisation. The transformation portfolio is large and ambitious to deliver the 2030 vision, and rightly so. And I think we are having to make difficult choices around what we keep going, what we stop, what we pause, to be able to support the resource. But when we do that, we have a really clear evidence base in terms of why we are doing that and why we're investing in one project and not another. And then we look at what can we learn around why that particular project was delayed or why we decided actually to invest elsewhere. And we have those discussions and we use that learning to inform the way that we are managing transformation and benefits. And I hope the committee will see the improvement in terms of the way that we're reporting and being a lot more transparent around the decisions that we're taking. I think, and we will absolutely continue to do that so that the committee has a real understanding of why those decisions are taken and when. But I suppose my overriding point is we've got a lot to do, and rightly so. And I want to make sure that we're investing what precious resource and money that we have in the right places to make the biggest impact on frontline policing and across the organisation. So absolutely there is real accountability there. And I think we will get better at reporting that as we continue through the journey. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's good to see the estates work coming on and having that reported. And as you say, Pauline, it's important in terms of be able to deliver the vision, a safe environment for the workforce to work in, but also access for our communities. So look forward to seeing that ongoing reporting. And then last of our committee chairs' reports, back to you, Tom, with Policing Together.
Thank you, Chair. I take it my report as read. There's 3 points I would want to highlight. The first is that we've had the inaugural meeting of the Independent Policing Advisory Group, which is a significant development in bringing external scrutiny and advice to the executive and the organisation going forward. And the second point is the full realignment now of the Sex Equality and Tackling Misogyny workstream into Policing Together. That was always reported into Policing Together, but now it's actually very aligned to the operational activities supporting that work. And the third area is, it was a very significant need of Policing Together was to get good data to make evidence-based decision-making the normal. And the committee were very encouraged. We had a clear demonstration of the cultural dashboard, which has been referenced before. And for the first time, that's allowing us to look in depth at data and giving us insight that we can then giving you some examples of that directly from it, is able to go deeply into, for instance, BME officers in terms of representation in ranks above constable, that were seen to be less than where it should be. But when we cut the data and look deeper into that, the average age of promotion to sergeant in the organisation is too long. It's still, I'm not justified, but it's 14 years. But when we looked at BME officers, it was 10 years, 10 and a bit years. So there was no discrimination there. The process was right. She then allowed to go deeper again and look at other reasons. And that's only one example of where this cultural dashboard goes forward. But it does highlight a significant issue for the work of DCC Smith and their colleagues around transformation. A lot of these systems, we have a core operating system for policing, and there's been huge investment and we're getting huge benefit from that now. But that investment needs to go now into those systems, legacy systems around people, for instance, exactly, where we've literally got people pulling data off of spreadsheets still and pulling it together and then putting technology across that to give us this level of insight. So I've had discussions with DCC Spears, who I believe is a senior reporting officer, identified for that going forward. And I would welcome an outline business case in terms of what that investment may need going forward. So we've got a huge step forward in capability, but it exposes further issues in terms of transformational change. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And I think it's hugely important that we have data for improvement, because without that data, we can't measure improvement going forwards. Can I take Katrina first and then Chief Constable?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom, for the update. Again, so really interesting update for me as well as authority member. Really excited by the prospect of the cultural dashboard, really excited by the prospect of data. And again, obviously, key principle of this is transparency. So I was wondering if there's aspirations of making that data publicly available, because again, I can imagine lots of things that are in a cultural dashboard will probably be subject to FOIs, etc., etc. So again, this principle of proactively putting the data out there for everybody to see what are the plans at the moment.
If you don't mind, this data has already been presented in the reporting to the People Committee. It's been on the position since last August. And so I would see that data being publicly available in the reports that come to People Committee.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you, Chair. And we absolutely agree with that. And Mr. Halpin's comment there about the quality of the information. So I spent some time this week with Amy Lord, who is one of the analysts who's been working on this. One of the things that struck me together with Tom's comments was the ability to benchmark ourselves around against colleagues in England and Wales. So that is really important. But as you say, in speaking to the analyst, it highlighted some of the hard work that they're having to do to gather this data into a form on Power BI that is presentable, and we can then make good decisions. But I'll ask Alan just to talk very briefly about the broader considerations around how we draw together these corporate systems and modernise them. We're in the foothills, as Beck says, but just be worth adding this at this point, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a moment just to promote the work of the analytical team, because they brought together a fantastic cultural dashboard. I don't see any other force in the UK with a dashboard like this, and with the availability of data and the availability to dive into that data. So that probably is something that I think would be of interest to all the board members. It's set against kind of 4 key pillars, and I think there'll be an opportunity in the coming weeks or months to just demonstrate that to all board members. But it's set against the fact that the systems that we have don't talk to each other, and the analytical team are working in silos. So looking at an enterprise system is an absolute priority for us. So I sit as the senior responsible officer for the development of that work. It would be our intention, and we're well developed in bringing forward an initial business case. And largely what that will do, amongst other things, we'll look at how does the finance data that Sarah and her team are working on connect with our HR data. So there is a significant piece of work ongoing. It's fairly well developed, and I think in the early part of 2026 we'll bring forward through the relevant committees just a proposal on how to take that forward.
I think that's really helpful, and thank you for highlighting the work of the analytical team in terms of the importance of the staff actually coming in, supporting the service delivery, because without that then we can't have that transformation. So thank you very much indeed. If we have no further comments or questions, I'm going to move on to the Chief Constable's report, and I'll hand straight over to the Chief Constable.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. A key responsibility for society is to build cohesion and resilient communities where concerns are identified quickly and the whole system supports children to thrive and flourish. Instances where young people, vulnerable young people, are victims of group-based child sexual exploitation rightly appalls communities. Preventing this vile offending, groups of men targeting and trafficking children for sexual abuse and bringing perpetrators to justice sits right at the core of my motivation as a police officer and the entire mission of Police Scotland to keep people safe. The threat and challenge has developed with increasing reported child sexual abuse and exploitation and globally connected and digitally enabled offenders operating in the online space, with a 20% year-on-year increase in reported online child sex abuse. I've been explicit about the duty on policing to build capability and capacity to address this harm online and in the physical space. Working with social work, education, health colleagues and the third sector to create and hold safe spaces for young people, identify concerns and take action to support and safeguard lies right at the heart of community policing. Legacy police services in Scotland and Police Scotland have, over a period of years, investigated group-based child sexual exploitation, working closely with prosecutors to build evidence and achieve important, albeit a limited number, of criminal justice outcomes, including convictions and deportations. This is a vital area of public protection where the establishment of Police Scotland has driven improvement, including through the establishment of a national child abuse investigation unit in 2013. A key role of the unit has been to improve our understanding, investigative response, intelligence, and our multi-agency approach to bring about changes in policy, practice and training in relation to child sexual exploitation. Police Scotland has worked closely with local authorities and social work, criminal justice colleagues and the third sector to review and learn from investigations to improve the whole system response and better support victims. Baroness Louise Casey's audit into the scale, nature and drivers of group-based child sexual exploitation in England and Wales, published in June this year, powerfully detailing necessary change with a rallying call to protect children, which everyone should support. In Scotland, along with the Chief Social Work Advisor, we co-chair the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, which has been in existence since September of 2024 and brings together Social Work Scotland, Scottish Government, Healthcare, COSLA, the Crown, Education Scotland, the Scottish Children's Reporter, the Society of Local Authority Chief Execs and Senior Managers, and a range of third sector agencies. The group, which met this week, seeks to improve coordination and capability to address child sexual abuse and exploitation, and we remain committed to playing our role in that whole system approach. That group has discussed Baroness Casey's audit and its recommendations on partnership working, and the members are committed to identifying areas for improvements. I would state my commitment that Police Scotland will continue to take learning from any source which contributes to keeping people safe. In response to Baroness Casey's recommendations, the National Police Chiefs Council and the National Crime Agency established Operation Beacon Port to identify cases where police forces and the Crown Prosecution Service made the decision to take no further action against suspects involved in group-based child sexual exploitation and abuse. Police Scotland undertook an aligned exercise to ensure a UK-wide law enforcement approach could be achieved. We are identifying crimes recorded between January of 2013 and the present, which involved one or more victims and 2 or more suspects, and where the victim is under the age of 18. Following investigation, a number of these crimes were reported to the Crown, and as described, some have resulted in criminal justice outcomes. Others, for example, in relation to reports involving young people as the offender and the victim, may have been progressed through other routes, for example, the Children's Reporter. Of crimes which fit the criteria mentioned and which remain unsolved, we continue to be in contact with Operation Beacon Port to assist with a UK law enforcement approach and understanding, and provide additional independent ratification around further investigative opportunities should the Crown request any further investigation of matters previously reported. We will undertake those inquiries. To be clear, Police Scotland will progress any opportunities for further investigation and take immediate safeguarding steps where concerns are identified. Police Scotland will conduct any reinvestigation in a trauma-informed way, which places victims and survivors at the heart of our approach. And as part of this work, we will develop an overview of the demographics of suspects and offenders to identify any patterns, trends, or concerns. As Chief Constable, I remain a core participant in the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, which was instigated in 2015 to consider the abuse of children in care in Scotland between 1933 and 2014. And we remain closely engaged with the inquiry and will continue to share information requested by the inquiry. Chair, as you know, I briefed First Minister John Swinney and the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, Angela Constance, Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Minister for Victims and Community Safety, and Minister for Children and Young People on this matter during a session at Bute House on Monday afternoon. This was an important opportunity to outline policing in Scotland's response to the evolving challenge of violence against women and girls and child sexual exploitation and abuse as part of a whole system approach. I underline our commitment to playing our part in protecting the most vulnerable, placing victims and survivors at the centre of investigations and bringing perpetrators to justice. We continue to watch developments closely and will update the authority as required. I will now turn to my report. As we approach the traditionally busy festive period and the end of 2025, I want to thank officers and staff for their service throughout the year, which has been set against an intensifying operating environment. Poverty, geopolitics, cybercrime and civil unrest is driving a high level of demand, and the challenge for policing is evolving rapidly, illustrated by increasing online harm and threat and violence associated with organised crime and a high level of protests. My report reflects some of those challenges and highlights action and outcomes driven by the hard work, skill and commitment of our officers, staff and volunteers during October and November. Officers provide a hugely valuable service for our communities, stepping forward at times of danger to protect others. The conviction of a man for attempted murder of an officer in Paisley in May 2024 this week is an important reminder of the violence and threat our officers can face in the course of their duties. It is worth pausing to recognise that this involved a marked police car being rammed before officers were confronted by Costati, a 32-year-old man who was brandishing a chainsaw. He was arrested and convicted of attempted murder this week, and he will be sentenced later. I pay huge tribute to the bravery officers demonstrated that day when confronted by acute and completely unacceptable levels of violence. And highlighting the criminal justice outcome is important to send a clear message that violence against officers and staff will not be tolerated. So returning to my report, I detail a number of criminal justice outcomes following murder investigations. And although homicides remain at an extremely low level in Scotland, each one is a tragedy for the victim and their loved ones, and each presents its own investigative challenges. Our commitment to achieving answers for families continues to be illustrated by our very strong detection rate in relation to what are devastating crimes, which also impact on wider communities. I want to thank the officers and staff, including forensic colleagues, for their skill, professionalism and resilience in these crucial cases. My report outlines human trafficking operations, money laundering and further arrests in relation to Operation Portalage, an investigation into targeted attacks in the east and west of the country. And this includes an update on the sentencing of a man to over 6 years in prison following investigations under Operation Portalage. I also provide an update in relation to policing around criminality and disorder associated with Bonfire Night period. A significant partnership drive supported by strong community policing sought to address the root causes of criminality and disorder which has been experienced during recent years. Under Operation Moonbeam, Police Scotland was prepared to respond this year, while officers in many areas of Scotland were equipped with body-worn video as our national rollout passed the halfway point ahead of Halloween. We made a very small number of arrests and, importantly, fireworks-related calls to the police reduced by just over a third compared to last year. And I want to thank our officers and staff, fire and rescue colleagues, other blue light colleagues and partners at local authorities and the third sector, including Crime Stoppers and communities, for the support and cohesion demonstrated. This positive outcome underlined the value of proactive, community-based policing. The young people we worked with partners to reach out around firearms disorder are a similar group to those who are at risk of being recruited and exploited by organised criminals, for example, in relation to county lines. And in my report, I outline progress on an embedded, enhanced community policing model, with a test of change having commenced in Forth Valley at the end of September. And we are listening carefully to the experiences of officers, staff and community and partners in Forth Valley as we assess the impact of the model to capture any learning as we move forward. And I'm grateful for the authority's ongoing interest in this work, and we will continue to report as progress is made. While we are hearing positive feedback, I've set out my desire to invest an additional 600 officers in local policing over the next 2 years to address harm and vulnerability, contribute to community cohesion, ensure public trust, and to share information and public confidence that policing can prevent crime and tackle antisocial behaviour. This is part of our overall resource requirement to strengthen our workforce, address pressures on our people and our policing performance, and deliver on our vision of safer communities, less crime, supportive victims and a thriving workforce. Investment will enable policing to strengthen our response to digitally enabled and globally connected crime, to target sex offenders, organised criminals and extremists who are radicalising, recruiting, exploiting and abusing our children, and bringing illegal drugs and violence to the streets of Scotland. I've discussed child sexual exploitation, and we have noted a long-term increase in reported sexual offences, up 45% in the last 10 years. This evidence that we must continue to improve our response to violence against women and girls. And in my report, I've outlined work, including policing's role in campaigning to call on men to reflect on their behaviour, to prevent offending and to tackle misogyny. We've set out further details on our resourcing requirements for the coming years to the Scottish Parliament's Criminal Justice Committee in a written evidence submission and during a session earlier this month, where, as mentioned, Chair, you represented the authority along with the Chief Executive in a later session. Throughout our evidence, we underline the success of policing reform as an outlier in the Scottish public sector, as well as evidencing ongoing efficiencies and affirming our commitment to continuous improvement. One example of ongoing improvement introduced this week is our move from legacy analogue technology platforms to a modern digital contact system under our unified communications and contact platform. The platform brings together different contact types such as 999, 101 and digital forms of contact from the public into a single unified platform with future capability to offer the public more ways to contact us, for example, through web chat and messaging services. While the public won't notice this difference in the system when they contact us, it will speed up our work and strengthen our system resilience while also providing more flexibility in contact handling. Although we continue to drive improvements and efficiencies, I have been clear around our funding requirements for the coming years. A flat cash scenario is not deliverable. It would require an immediate recruitment pause, and attrition of our workforce would lead to a significant reduction in visible policing, prevention work, delays in responding to calls from the public, and a severe impact on our ability to respond to major events. Difficult decisions would be required. Of course, the UK budget was announced yesterday, and the Cabinet Secretary for Justice, Angela Constance, provided her perspective during an evidence session to the Criminal Justice Committee of the Scottish Parliament. And with the authority, we will pay close attention to these developments and their implications. Detailed engagement with the authority and communication with Scottish Government at ministerial and official level will continue ahead of the Scottish budget in January. And my report outlines our latest intake of recruits earlier this month, which maintained our officer establishment at around 16,500. Police officers, staff and volunteers are the key to the success of policing in Scotland. Over a period of years, Police Scotland has driven a focus on values and standards of behaviour, including through the Policing Together programme and the cultural dashboard that we heard about earlier. I know the professionalism and compassion our people demonstrate right across the country, day in and day out, as I have set out today. And I'm constantly blown away by what officers do, the care and pride and the sacrifices they make to do their duty. My report outlines our ongoing work to implement the Police Ethics, Conduct and Scrutiny Scotland Act of 2025, including a refreshed code of ethics which provides further depth to what we mean by integrity, fairness, respect and upholding human rights. And also outlined our continued work with the Scottish Government on a new vetting and conduct regulations. This important work will ensure our resolve to deliver professional, value-based policing for our communities that is underpinned in legislation. At the same time, we must constantly seek to improve the experience of our officers and staff, and my report outlines progress on this year's workforce survey, which I have committed to conducting annually. We are working hard to understand the results, which will be further shared across the organisation and with the authority as part of an extensive engagement and communications programme. My commitment is that the Chief Officer team will again act on what the survey tells us and support leaders right across the organisation to take targeted action so that we improve the experience of our people. Lastly, I outlined some of the changes to our Chief Officer team's responsibilities following Assistant Chief Constable's Emma Bond's secondment to the UK Policing Reform Team. Thank you, Chair.
As always, Chief Constable, thank you very much for that very thorough oversight. I'm now going to hand over to board members who've indicated they wish to ask a question. I'm going to start with Katerina.
Very much, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for the report and for your kind of voiceover on this. And I am really, really pleased that you have started off with the topic of protecting our most vulnerable, and specifically within the context of child sexual exploitation and abuse. I think it's obviously it's always highly topical, but particularly just now. And I'm glad that you mentioned Operation Beacon Port. As the Chair alluded to in her report, we had an opportunity to be briefed on this by the NCA last week. Although I've since discovered much of that information is in the public domain already on the NCA website, so I feel slightly less special about this now. But it's, you know, it sets out really quite clearly what Beacon Port is doing. And I suppose my question is, I'm keen to understand, because you've outlined a range of measures that Police Scotland have been doing about this, because obviously it's a different jurisdiction, different approach, etc. So, but from a public interest perspective, Beacon Port looks at establishing a new data model. It looks at doing this consistently. It recognizes the fact that abuse doesn't necessarily happen quite neatly within the different police forces. And I think most importantly, what Beacon Port also does is it gives the NCA that kind of sense check. So where police forces are submitting cases that were previously not investigated, the NCA will have a look at that and identify the ones where further investigation would indeed be required. So I'm keen to understand how does what Police Scotland either has done or is still doing in terms of data analysis, but also the reinvestigation and that independent assessment, how does that compare to Beacon Port? I am conscious that Beacon Port has received additional funding, and I'm keen to understand what is the situation within Scotland in terms of funding for this really important activity. So that's my first question.
Thank you, and thanks for that question. And as you quite rightly identify, it was important that I was able to describe in detail to the board today the approach that we are taking, and it was obviously of interest to the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. So you are aware that we already have a very strong and well-established working relationship with the National Crime Agency. And in response to Baroness Casey's audit, the NCA have undertaken a role of that independent scrutiny of cases that fit the criteria of having multiple offenders. And we saw, as I said in the report, to mirror the approach, take time to review the crimes that fit that criteria that haven't been pursued, and then run a parallel, if you like, approach in terms of assessing those crimes, but at the same time linking in, working with the NCA and Beacon Port to ensure that we have that independence, an independent view of the opportunities, the investigative opportunities, but also to your point, Katerina, in terms of this offending doesn't take place neatly within the boundaries of individual forces or for us a country, and therefore it's also important that this work is enabled to ensure that if there's links across boundaries that they are identified and we're able to take an appropriate law enforcement response to it. The forming of our national child abuse investigation team back in 2015 ensures and has ensured that we have been in a strong position in this space. The remit of that unit is undertaking complex investigations, and the unit has a strong pedigree of having done that over the years. So we already have the Scotland-wide view that colleagues south of the border don't, and as highlighted in Baroness Casey's review. But to your point in terms of resourcing, so we are committed to this work, but at the same time, I need to set that against the threat and harm that we are seeing, both in terms of abuse, child abuse, both online and within locations and across Scotland. So we are balancing that, and part of our budget ask to Scottish Government reflects the fact that not only do we require additional resourcing around community policing that has a place in this, but also in the specialist areas of our business in terms of public protection, investigators, and our expert police staff, for example, in relation to analysts. So that resourcing issue is still to be resolved, and we will start this work, but I suppose the pace at which we can do it will be in some way dependent on the level of resourcing that we get and the decisions that we are making on a daily basis in terms of where we put resource to manage threat and harm that is happening now. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate that explanation. So just to be slightly sort of pedantic about this, so that independence element, because as I say, what Beacon Port to me signals is that no one police force down south will be able to mark their own homework when it comes to why wasn't this investigated. And I suppose what I'm hearing here is you're saying you are engaged with Beacon Port in this, to get that independent assurance, because that's, I think from a public interest perspective, it's that not, marking your own homework, so to say. So you can absolutely give assurances on that.
Absolutely, but recognising that the relationship between policing in Scotland and the Crown and the legislative framework is different to that exists across England and Wales. So there are some nuances in there. But yes, we are aligned and engaged with the NCA in relation to this work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And you have another question?
Yes, I do have two more questions in relation to the policing of September the 4th protest around outside Parliament. So I've got two questions related to that, if I may, Chair. So, I mean, your report outlines the fact that obviously there has been a protest, there's been a review of the protest, and you've taken learnings as well. I would be quite keen for you just to elaborate a little bit on this, because obviously what your report doesn't mention is that on the 1st of November there was a subsequent event organised by the same group, and that was if I dare say so, a much better run policing operation. So I'd be quite keen to kind of explore that a little bit, and then I've got another specific question.
Thank you. I'll provide some context, and then I'll ask Jane Connors just to highlight where the learning came. And I think I covered this at Justice Committee. If we look at events and protests in the last 3 years, they have doubled across Scotland. So just over 1,000 to now over 2,200. So we see over 40 events and protests per week currently across Scotland, driven often by not only national events but international events and geopolitics. So the environment we're operating in is dynamic. It is putting a significant increased pressure on our people, and so to not in any way diminish the learning from the way in which we police that event. The officers that are operating in this environment do so, I think, in a professional and expert way 99% of the time, and we should recognise that. However, there are some lessons that we can learn. So I'll ask Jane just to pick up the detail, but it was important that I provided that context, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the question. In relation to the event on the 4th of September and the learning that was then implemented on the 1st of November, we did undertake the review of the 4th of September. We didn't wait for that review to be brought forward. We looked at the learning that we'd taken immediately, and we made sure that we implemented it into that demonstration. I think the key aspects of learning was the early deployment of police liaison officers and protest liaison officers. What that meant was that they could engage with different groups on the ground, talk to people, understand their needs, understand what they would like to achieve out of their protest, and then facilitate that in a much more effective way. There was also the deployment of decibel application technology, which meant we could monitor the sound levels much more again, and then understand how the different sound levels impacted on the different protests and frustrated the different protests that we'd seen on the 4th of September. So those learnings in particular were engaged. We also engaged better with the different groups in the lead up to it, rather than just waiting for the protest. We did actually get some very positive feedback, and we also got a letter from the Director of Women's Rights Network in Scotland to compliment us and thank us for having put the learning in place, which I think is really important to show that we did actually implement that learning and take the lessons from it.
No, thank you for that. I really appreciate the update. Thank you. And as you say, you have received, I think credit was given where credit was due for that, very much the change in approach. So thank you for that. And apologies for hogging this, but just my final question, and that this relates to the report of a broken umbrella. Now, this isn't about taking it down to this particular individual case, but again, from a public interest perspective, I absolutely have to ask, Chief Constable, your report states police officers were in attendance and following a report of a broken umbrella, we recorded a crime of vandalism and an individual was later invited to discuss the offer of recorded police warning. I understand you have reversed the decision. But if I'm sitting here and I'm thinking I'm a member of the public and an allegation has been made about a broken umbrella. Now, in this particular case, the individual against whom the allegation was made is somebody who has got access to media, who's got access to lawyers, etc. So, and actually, in fact, there was ample evidence to see that the damage, in fact, wasn't caused by that individual. But to somebody reading this, thinking, so somebody's made an allegation and it has led to a crime being recorded. You know, I think there's a broader point here about what is the level of investigation that Police Scotland undertakes before it decides to issue a recorded police warning. I mean, again, it goes to the effectiveness of direct measures and the confidence that the public can have in that. So I would really welcome a little bit of a broader kind of narrative around this, because that was the public outcry really, is what is the level of investigation before you take action, which in the end proved to be entirely not appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. The first point I think is important to make, and it goes back to my earlier context setting, is that we are asking our officers to operate in often very dynamic situations, and they are making decisions in good faith, and they're having to make them quickly. And we could all sit back and look at that in the cold light of day, and we might have come up with a different decision. But officers need to know that they have my full support in making those decisions. They are often difficult decisions to be made, and they don't have the benefit of sitting and pausing and considering. That's so important, and that they're able to do that. And if there is learning to be had, then we also acknowledge that, and we've demonstrated that. In terms of specifically in relation to the crime, a proportionate response would be where I would want to see it. But it's fair to say in this particular case, there was a lot of interest and social media reporting on it. We've learnt lessons. A proportionate approach is one that I would also always want us to take, and I think I'm confident that we've taken the learning from that, but recognising our colleagues are still having to make difficult decisions in very small time frames often, and these environments are sometimes quite complex and difficult to navigate.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and I think it is important, as you say, Chief Constable, to recognise the officers are making these decisions in split-second decisions, and actually we've demonstrated there's mechanisms in place for supervision and oversight, and that's what we've had here, and I think we commend the approach in terms of openness and transparency and the learning that there's been for that. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move to Pauline in terms of your question.
Thank you very much for your report, Chief Constable. Welcome the update on the community policing test of change in Forth Valley, and I wonder if you could give us a bit more insight as to the key findings thus far and how they relate to the intended outcomes.
Thank you very much for the question. And it's a really good opportunity for us to be able to bring forward. The formal evaluation is actually ongoing. It'll be subjected to be able to be scrutiny in December, but I can certainly bring forward some headlines for you. I think one of the key points for me is the commitment that Police Scotland has made to reform and to make sure that we consistently move forward with our journey. Policing for Our Communities has been in planning for a significant number of years. It actually went live on the 29th of September, as you say, in Forth Valley. It comes in a couple of parts, so I'll go through some of the detail and then be able to talk about some of the feedback and the changes and the positivity that we're seeing. I think the first thing I would say is, whilst we're really pushing on reform, we're also aware that we do have significant resourcing pressures, and being able to try and actually put this model into practice at its absolute optimum. We've not been able to do that. We've done as much as we can, but we're slightly short of what our optimum model would be, but we are still progressing. So in terms of one element of it, which is the community investigation hubs, I've explained here at the board before that calls come in and they all just wash into response, they all wash into the community teams. There's no ability to triage and be able to do something different and give a better service to victims. What we've seen with our communications department producing local policing appointments, which is where they make appointments for victims and other people to have the incident discussed, we're often not able to meet those appointments because we simply don't have the resources at the time the appointment's made to be able to go and do it. So that failure demand feeds in a significant amount. But in Forth Valley itself, we've made just under 700 appointments, and actually we've been able to attend every single one. So if you consider at the end of that is a member of the community, which is either a victim or somebody who needs to speak to police, we're actually delivering already a much more significant service. And as a result of that, what we're seeing is, because it's not washing into response, we're seeing about a 31% reduction in response officers actually holding crimes, because they go to the incident, they then hold on to the crime. They're on rest days, they're on events, they're on protest. They can't get to dealing with that. So you can see already the significant shift that we're seeing in that. And just to bring that to life, the feedback from the hub itself, that they're able to look at the reports that are coming in, they're able to look at some of the crime patterns, they're able to look at some of the investigative opportunities, because they're really able to see it on a consistent basis. A really good example of that is they saw a number of calls around shoplifting. They identified a pattern, they put into an investigation strategy, and they were able to arrest the offender. That person's actually been charged with 19 counts of theft. So you can see where all of these pieces are starting to come together. That links with the community teams, because you need people to go and do those arrests, you need people to go and do the work that sits with it. Because we've had so much abstraction out of the community teams, because of the pressure, the events, and the Chief Constable has talked about a number of those things. We've done a lot of proactivity, but the model is not as optimum as we'd like. If we're starting to see less crimes being held in response, that should take some of the demand out and less backfilling. So you can see where this ecosystem fits in. It's never just a single piece. But the community teams already, they've been doing a lot of work around the partnership with local businesses, tackling retail crime in the local areas. They've done a lot of high visibility patrols to combat antisocial behaviour over Halloween in particular. They've been executing drug warrants. They've been able to go in to visit schools, trying to get onto that prevention and partnership approach that we're seeing. We are seeing an increase in confidence in Forth Valley, which I would attribute to being able to see your local officers and actually feeling that the response is improving. In terms of feedback, we do have anecdotal feedback from officers in the investigation hub who feel valued, who feel like they're combating crime and feel like they're delivering for communities. We've had feedback from members of the public who are surprised and pleased at the swift response that they're seeing from Police Scotland. We're having feedback from retailers and communities about some of the crimes that they're actually tackling. So in summary, we are definitely seeing the signs that the model is right. We absolutely understand that this will be significant change in order to deliver our reform, but it needs investment, it needs sustainability, and that community bedrock that we've talked about in so many areas around community cohesion, violence against women and girls, tackling exploitation and vulnerability, and youth violence, those are going to be the benefits of being able to invest in this model, and we'll be able to bring formal evaluation through as required.
Thank you very much. We're still with you, Pauline? Commissioner training? No, okay, right, grand, thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Constable, for the report. I wanted to turn to the part of the report relating to a thriving workforce, and particularly to the workforce survey. And I welcome your reference to the importance of team ethos and improvements in culture across supervisors and first-line managers. And I think much of the discussion we've had this morning about the pressures that police officers and others are under only serves to illustrate the importance of progress in this area. I note the responses to the survey included qualitative data in the form of 23,000 open responses, which is obviously a considerable amount of data. And you've referred both in the report and this morning to the fact that you're going to be involved in undertaking extensive communications and engagement program. Obviously, that data is going to be an enormous amount of it's going to be valuable in learning and driving improvement, and you acknowledge that. Can you say a little more about how that will be done in practice? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We've now seen the overarching summary of the workforce survey that's been presented across the executive, and in the coming week we'll also share that with our divisional commanders and heads of department, and we will bring that report to the People Committee next week to provide that overarching view. One of the learning we took from last year was around our ability to have the data rolled out and our ability then to act on that data. So week beginning the 12th of December, we will take that to our Senior Leaders Forum, and at the same time start to share the disaggregated data with commanders and with heads of departments so they can actually make real progress against that. So this is certainly quicker than we did last year, and was certainly one of our objectives going into year 2 with the workforce survey. So in the coming week, we will start to develop that, and certainly ahead of Christmas, we will be sharing data right across the workforce with what our staff and our officers have said.
Thank you very much.
And does that answer the question, Chris, about the freehand comments? So there's data, but there's also the opportunity, which a lot of people have taken, to provide freehand analysis. So the analysis of that? Yeah,
so that data will be built into the reports that will go to specific geographical or business-led areas. They will be able to see that free text, if you like, that supports the analytical product.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Thank you. Tom?
Thank you. In your report, you discussed the review of probationer training, which I welcome. It talks about the review being ongoing, but we have moved from a 13 to 15-week course. So where is the end game with that review, and is it ambitious enough with just looking at the training? This is absolutely key to cultural shift in terms of the Policing Together agenda. And is there the ability to really have a fresh look at this in terms of even an external view of what probationer training and learning, training, development needs are for Police Scotland going forward?
Thanks, Tom. We have done a considerable amount of work over the course of this year to arrive at the position that we wanted to extend the probationer training programme. It was set against our ambitious programme or schedule of intakes. It's also balanced against our continued desire to offer non-residential training for officers coming into the organisation who may have other responsibilities. So we have agreed to increase that programme from 16 to 18 weeks. I guess why are we doing that? And there's probably two key elements. It's officer feedback. So the new recruits are telling us that the period of 15, 16 weeks is really intense. It's a crammed programme, and they need more time to consolidate the training. It's also a desire on behalf of the organisation that we want to improve their operational readiness for when they arrive in their policing divisions. So that's what sits behind that. What does that training programme look like? Well, it'll be an enhancement of trying to balance your legislative learning with the practical application of that learning, and we reckon that the contextual learning aspect is very, very important. We want to see improvements in the standards of fitness. We want to enhance the wellbeing support, not only for the officer, but for how they work within local communities, recognising the levels of vulnerability that they deal with. And we want to put a real focus on their investigative ability, whether that's in the investigation of crime or the support that they provide to victims. So that for us is really important. So I sense that work is done. We work closely with CIPR, as you well know, and I think we will always keep the content of the programme under review. We have, over the course of the last year, strengthened the probationer training team. We have now a superintendent who has got an entire focus on probationer training, and that change will take effect on our next intake scheduled for the 12th of January.
Thank you. I welcome that, and I welcome the focus on probationers' feedback and what they need going forward. A challenge, I suppose, that is not ambitious enough. We're looking at what we're doing for the training needs that we're doing at the moment, when in actual fact, as you've referred to CIPA, there has been academic studies in this area, there's been reviews in this area that have recommended much more wider fundamental change. Now, I'm not suggesting we would sit here today and say this is what we need. I don't know what we need, but I'm just wondering whether there should be a larger view with an independent element, so it's not just a self-fulfilling circle that we're looking at ourselves.
No, I think that's absolutely fair comment, and that's something we can take on board to continually look at how we would review and continue to improve that training programme for our recruits.
Thanks very much indeed for that, and I think so. That's really helpful, Alan. But we've talked about change, we've talked about culture, we've talked about the future. So that's the probationers coming in are our future, and they'll be with us for 20 or 30 years. So actually, how do we think about the next generation is so incredibly important, and it's also affirming to hear your commitment in terms of their well-being and support. So that's grand. I'm going to pass over to Mary now.
Chair and Chief Constable, thank you very much for your report, comprehensive as always. In terms of very recent legislation, a new and important emergency release scheme for prisoners is now being implemented to address severe prison overcrowding, obviously. Now, as a result of that, we've already had a number of prisoners released into the community early, and I think there are 5 more tranches now being implemented between now and April. This clearly has implications for a range of agencies and services, everything from housing, employment and health support for those prisoners who are being released early, support for victims, key priority for Police Scotland and for the SPA, and concerns about community safety. And so I wondered if you could just maybe say something about the impact on policing and the challenges facing Police Scotland as this is rolled out. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll make a couple of points, and then Bex will pick up some of the detail. As you know, Scotland has a disproportionately high number of prisoners across its prison estate. So I think we'd probably all agree that begs some questions as to whether that's the right way in which to deal with offending. And I know that Martin Evans, previous chair of this board, has done some work commissioned by the Cabinet Secretary for Justice in relation to a greater focus around community justice and community payback. And I think we would all recognise, and the studies would say, that the impact on short sentences for prolific offenders is such that actually you don't address any of the issues around offending, and that you just become a cycle of returning into prison, and none of the underlying causes are being addressed. And I think you can see by the rate at which, following each release, the rate at which the prison population has once again reached over that 8,200, 300, sits with the evidence to say this is not the correct approach. I think that a stronger community justice, community payback regime with necessary funding is the way forward. That does, I understand and fully accept, will create some nervousness with victims. But if those programmes and regimes are resourced well, I'm confident that that is the right approach. It costs £52,000 to keep somebody in prison in Scotland in a year. I think Martin's report talks about 5,000 for good community justice. Relevance to policing. I think if this is the direction, the policy position for the government moving forward, our community policing ask 600 extra officers is part of the solution to this issue, that we form part of that offender management capability that sits within community. We are the eyes and the ears. We are often the conveners of partners. And I think that this approach absolutely will require investment in community policing if it's to be successful. And Bex will pick up the current demand on us as a result of those policy decisions by the government.
Thanks for the question, Mary. So in terms of the impact at a tactical level around what we do with the release of prisoners, we have a responsibility to check all of our systems to give information to the Scottish Prison Service for them to make a decision as to who should be released. And that's obviously done on a threat, risk and harm basis. You'll know the exemptions in terms of release. So we do that within Police Scotland, and we pass that information to the Scottish Prison Service. Just to give you an idea, that's roughly around over 1,000 hours of work for officers and staff to be able to do that. It's right and proper. We provide that information so that the prison service can provide and make appropriate, proportionate decisions around the individuals for release. But just to give you an idea of some of the work that sits behind that. And then, of course, there is, once those individuals are released, there is understanding the impact on communities. And to the Chief's point, with community policing officers, there's a big responsibility there to understand and support individuals in the community, look after victims as a result of the release is another part of that. We haven't got the data around reoffending for the latest tranche yet, but we will. And I think previously, we saw, unfortunately, that cycle of people being released early and reoffending and coming back into the prison estate. So that's something that we're really conscious of. But I think for me, probably the most important part is the impact it has on local policing teams around, the work that they're doing in terms of supporting victims and those individuals that are released from a preventative capability as well. So thanks for the question.
Thank you very much. I think you've covered the areas I was interested in, but it is very disheartening when one scheme like this goes ahead, only to look again in a few weeks or months and see that the numbers are back up again and something else has to be done. So I think it would be helpful if this board got a report back on the reoffending rates, for example, and on any other issues that arise because of the implementation of this scheme around victim support and the impact on police time to feed into those sorts of mechanisms that you've just mentioned. I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Alistair?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. My question relates to the Chief Officer team responsibilities. First of all, though, can I just say that I really welcome ACC Bonds suits secondment. I think Police Scotland's experience will be invaluable, and equally I expect that there'll be learning that will feed up from the work that's going on in that UK context that hopefully will help us here within Police Scotland. I've been fortunate enough over the last couple of weeks to attend the regional engagement sessions with councillors from the local authorities in the north, the west and the east of Scotland. And I have to say that I thought the agenda was excellent. Many of the topics that you've touched on today, the agenda covered scrutiny and accountability, policing for our communities, community cohesion, antisocial behaviour and youth violence. And there were some really worthwhile conversations around that and a great exchange of information. But with your changes, I see that as a temporary measure, but 2-year ACCs will be taken on responsibilities for engagement and operational responsibilities in the north of Scotland. So I just wanted to seek assurances that the local authorities in the north of the country will receive the same access to chief officers, given the new arrangements that you've set out within your paper.
Thank you very much for the question and the opportunity to provide that assurance and reassurance. We all know that at the heart of effective policing is partnerships and being able to work with local authorities, elected members, MSPs and everybody within the partnership arena is really, really important. Our divisional commanders are fully empowered and they work with their local partners within their divisions. But it is an opportunity for us with the realignment of portfolios actually to have the islands, the Highlands and Islands moving across. So we now have all of our island community and island policing under one executive lead. There's real complexities with the islands, there's real complexities in how policing is done in there. So actually that's been an advantage that we've seen from this. And Wendy will pick up that portfolio, Wendy Middleton. Tim Ayres, who's already on the east, will pick up Tayside and Fife and being able to look across the central and again bring some of that experience. I think the key reassurance that I will give is that the ACCs will continue to support the regional and the local scrutiny boards. They will continue to work with COSLA and Solace, as well as picking up the thematic engagement that they will need to do across national boards such as resilience, etc. So absolutely that reassurance is there. There will be no loss of contact and support. And having spoken to both Tim and Wendy, they're really energised and looking forward to working with some new divisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Chief Constable, as always, thank you very much indeed, and thank you and the team for the openness and transparency with which you approach our questioning. Thank you. I'm going to move on to our Chief Executive's report now.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pull out 3 elements from my report. The first being that the 2024/25 annual report and accounts will be laid in the Scottish Parliament on Monday, the 1st of December. This document will also be published in full on the authority's website on the same day, and in line with previous years, this will be accompanied by some summary slides to make this information more consumable for anyone who's interested in reading it. The second thing I just wanted to touch on briefly was, as you referred to earlier, our appearance at the pre-budget scrutiny evidence session of the Criminal Justice Committee at the Scottish Parliament on the 5th of November. I'm not going to go into much of the content because we do have a specific item on that later in the agenda. I just wanted to flag that I was asked a question by Mr Jamie Hepburn, MSP, in relation to the benchmarking of the SPA's oversight functions against others in the UK. I've since written to the committee to highlight the exercise undertaken in 2023 to compare the authority to its peers, and by peers I mean authorities such as BTPA, the Republic of Ireland Police Authority, the PSNI Board, and a selection of OPCCs across England and Wales, just to confirm that we do compare positively in a range of measures, and all of that information is available in my letter to the committee, which is linked to my report. Finally, I'd like to recommit to the authority's ongoing programme of corporate benchmarking as we continue to find ways of improving our efficiency and effectiveness. The last point I was going to make was just around the best value audit and inspection. We, along with Police Scotland and Forensic Services, have received a draft of the best value audit from HMICS and Audit Scotland. We got this on the 31st of October. And together with Police Scotland and Forensic Services, we have submitted initial comments and feedback on that draft report, which we look forward to being published in the new year. And I'd just like to thank both HMICS and Audit Scotland for all of their work and their very high levels of engagement across the teams. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm going to hand over to Angela Leach.
Thank you, and thanks, Chris, for your report. And it's really reassuring just to hear what you're doing in terms of benchmarking and picking up what others are doing and learning as you go along. So thank you for that update. I've got 2 questions. One in relation to the reference to international development. And you mentioned that there will be a refresh of that strategy. I just wonder if you've got a timescale for that. It probably would be interesting to see it at some point. And then in relation to Appendix A, there's reference to the Scottish Railway Police Committee and the British Transport Police Survey. There's a comment in there on the differences between the Scottish results and those that have appeared for other parts of the UK. I just wondered if you could expand on that.
Thanks, Angela. Just in relation to your first question, my understanding is that the current international development strategy was published back in 2021, and the authority has requested a review of this. And Mr Halpin may want to come in, but I believe that both he and ACC Ratcliffe from Police Scotland are working on a new strategic direction for the Academy, and an update will be due probably via PCC, if I understand correctly, in Q1 of the next financial year. But I don't know if, Tom, if you wanted to come in any of that.
Yeah, That's correct, and that work is ongoing, but I think it's important to note that that's joint work, that this strategy is prepared jointly with Police Scotland and the officials of the Scottish Police Authority, because there is legislative responsibilities on the authority as well about deployments overseas, so I welcome that.
Thanks, Tom. And just in relation to your second question, I understand that there will be some focus group work undertaken with a commitment to report back to the committee in March of next year, and that's probably the next steps. Obviously, both Tom and Mary Keithley attend the committee, so I don't know if they wanted to add anything at this point.
We had the most recent meeting, it's referred in your paper on Tuesday of this week, and that report, which will be full, will come in due course. But it's important to note that the staff survey for BTP was shared with us, but so was the rail industry staff survey in terms of British Transport Policing, and that's a further insight as well, and that will be disseminated in due course.
Thank you. Just as we've talked about earlier, it'd be useful just to have that feedback so that we can see what we can learn from experiences elsewhere. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going on to agenda item 7 and handing over to our Forensic Services Director, Fiona Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. My report provides an update on areas of performance, finance, workforce and strategic development across forensic services. It reflects a period of high activity, considerable progress and some important challenges that I want to highlight at the outset. First, on finance, we're reporting a year-to-date underspend of 0.4 million at Q2, driven primarily by lower than anticipated pay costs. However, demand pressures continue in several areas, most notably in toxicology, where caseloads linked to drug driving remain higher than forecast. Whilst these pressures require careful management, our current assessment is that we will achieve a break-even position by year-end. Capital investment remains on track, supporting essential upgrades to our equipment, laboratories and scientific capability. Second, on demand and operational performance, the service continues to manage high operational volumes across all major disciplines. Toxicology remains the most pressurised area, both in volume and complexity, and we continue to work closely with Police Scotland and the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service to ensure clear prioritisation and a focus on cases involving the highest risk and greatest harm. Despite these pressures, our teams continue to deliver high-quality scientific work, and I want to acknowledge the professionalism and the commitment that they demonstrate every day. Third, on people, I'm pleased to report the arrival of our first forensic support modern apprentices based at Gartcosh and Dundee, and this marks the beginning of a new pathway into forensic science and reflects our commitment to widening access to the profession. More broadly, staff wellbeing, development and safe working practices remain central to our leadership focus, particularly given the sensitive and often demanding nature of the material that our teams handle. Building and sustaining a resilient, skilled workforce remains one of our highest priorities. I would also like to highlight this year's Forensic Excellence Awards held in September. These awards recognise outstanding contributions across forensic services, celebrating excellence in science, innovation, collaboration and leadership. The achievements of this year's nominees and winners were exceptional, and they serve as a powerful reminder of the talent, dedication and integrity that underpins the service's work. Fourth, I'd like to draw the authority's attention to two significant pieces of strategic work. The Forensic Services Strategic Workforce Plan sets out a comprehensive and forward-looking framework for how we build, support and sustain the workforce that we need for the future. It provides detailed analysis of our current and emerging skills requirements, identifies risks associated with an ageing specialist workforce, and outlines priority areas for recruitment, career pathways, and succession planning. The plan also sets clear actions to develop capability in new and emerging forensic disciplines, ensuring that we remain agile and able to respond to the evolving demands of policing and justice. Our first research, development and innovation strategy, set out in the appendix, establishes a clear vision for how forensic services will contribute to and benefit from scientific advancement. It sets out a more structured and collaborative approach to research, working with academic partners, national bodies and forensic providers, and identifies priorities for developing new methods, improving efficiency, and enhancing scientific robustness. The strategy also ensures that innovation is underpinned by ethical practice, rigorous validation, and alignment with the needs of the justice system. Together, these elements position forensic services to play a more influential role in shaping the future of forensic science in Scotland and the wider United Kingdom. I would also note the inclusion of the Forensic Services Annual Review as an appendix to my report. This provides a comprehensive reflection on our performance, achievements, and challenges over the last financial year and offers important context on the updates in my report. Finally, I would like to update the authority on my contribution to the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee on Tuesday this week. I was invited to give evidence as part of the committee's inquiry into the future of forensic science across England and Wales. I spoke about the importance of independence, quality standards, and sustainable investment, as well as the unique model that we operate here in Scotland. I highlighted the challenges facing the sector, including workforce pressures, increasing case complexity, and the need for coordinated national research, and set out areas where Scotland's experience can offer valuable learning. It was a constructive session and a welcome opportunity to showcase the strength of forensic services in Scotland. Chair, that concludes my introduction, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and I'm glad you mentioned the House of Lords session. I was going to mention it and commend it to others to watch. I think you were highly professional, gave a very good account, but also that openness and transparency of where there's still more to do and how we can learn. So it is a good watch indeed. Pauline.
Many thanks for your report, Fiona. You mentioned the increasing demand from drug driving toxicology, and that's been met this year by an underspend on staff pay costs. What is the forecast going forward into next year and beyond in terms of that increasing demand and the pressure that that's going to put on budgets?
Thank you for the question, and I think it's really important that we look to work collaboratively with Police Scotland to expand the roadside testing in relation to tackling the problem of drug driving on the roads of Scotland. In doing that, we need to make sure that we have the analytical testing capacity that's available to support the positive roadside tests, which unfortunately are a very, very high number of positives that we do see from tests that are undertaken. In terms of the laboratory, we are managing the demand, which is higher and has remained higher for a considerable period now than what we had forecast, through both internal capacity and through external outsourcing. As the pilots that have been referred to earlier in the Chief Constable's report progress, I think we'll learn more around what we think the implications are around future demand forecasting. Given that we have the underspend position with the forensics budget at this point in time, we're able to manage some of that increase in demand through that underspend. We need to consider carefully, and we had a good discussion at the Forensic Services Committee in relation to the pilots, to make sure that we're keeping a really good understanding about what that increasing demand for analysis is, and making sure that we've the available capacity either within forensic services or through our outsourced provider.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Angela?
Thank you, and thanks again, Fiona, for the report. It's really comprehensive as ever and gives us a flavour of the progress that you're making, so thank you. You did expand when you gave your update on the area that I was particularly interested in. It is the workforce plan, and you talk a lot about staff in your report. I'm keen just to understand a wee bit more about how you will enable it to be more dynamic, so that the plan does enable you to flex staff and provide that agility that you're going to need in the future as circumstances change. And also how staff have been engaged in the process of developing the plan so that then the implementation becomes a lot more straightforward.
Thank you. And we've worked with a partner in Skills for Justice to develop the strategic workforce plan, which is in its final stages of review. I think that the plan itself, it takes us a giant leap forward, but it's not at the destination that we need to be. And I think we need better granularity of data. We need to work hard, I think, with colleagues in terms of understanding long-term demand forecasting. And I think we have a great data set now that will allow us to make much better decisions in terms of the workforce and in particular in terms of the skills mix of the workforce. But it needs to be more sophisticated. We need to understand clearly vision and priorities in terms of changing crime trends, and to make sure that Forensic Services is able to respond and support Police Scotland and the Crown Office to be able to deliver the right types of services at the right time. And the Strategic Workforce Plan really helps us, I think, to be able to do that. What we need to do is to work with staff to better understand how we can capture data around the makeup of cases. So it's still quite high level within the Strategic Workforce Plan that we have done. So we need to dig into specific forensic disciplines, I think, and to better understand that. And also to consider how we incorporate productivity improvement as well into that document. So at the moment, when we are looking at it, we can see where we think the future workforce mix and size and scale needs to get to. But there is a much more complex picture that sits around that we need to factor in. So staff have been involved in the development of the plan. Skills for Justice and other members of the senior management team in Forensic Services have worked hard to engage, and we are planning a series of roadshows in the new year to really get out there and talk to our staff about this is the document, this is what it tells us, because there's a really interesting story about where the organisation has been, particularly as we've been through a journey of change, but really how we're going to use this to make better decisions moving forward, and exploiting the benefits of our new operating model, where we're now looking at multi-skilling staff and making sure we're skilling people in the right places.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. Thank you. Is there a time scale for it? Have you got a timeline?
So in terms of the roadshows for staff, there will be in January, and we will bring the final version of the Strategic Workforce Plan into public session at the February Forensic Services Committee.
Paul?
I wonder, I'm looking at 1.6 research, development and innovation strategy, and I wonder if you can maybe expand about how important research, development and innovation is to an organisation like Forensic Services, and how important this strategy is and the linkage and partnerships that this can help with.
Thank you. And research, development, and innovation is critical within the professional forensic scientific arena. And in fact, in my evidence to the House of Lords on Tuesday, it was very much looking at how we can maximise forensic research and innovation across the whole of the United Kingdom, and the importance of being able to access funding to do that. The RD&I strategy that we have developed sets out at quite high level the research priorities in the areas where we think we need to focus to make sure that we're keeping the service alive to future challenges. Artificial intelligence is clearly an area across policing and forensic science where we need to look at how we use new technology in a carefully considered and ethical way. And we need to, I think, become a little bit more confident through engagement with other partners to help us on that journey. Because particularly in a very regulated, validated scientific environment, we need to be cautious, and we need to make sure that we bring public trust and confidence with us in the use of new technology. The strategy itself, I think, it highlights the need for us to work across the rich landscape that we have in Scotland of academic institutions and other bodies such as the Leverhulme Institute for Forensic Science Research at the University of Dundee to make sure that we're working collaboratively with our partners in academia. Because the resource is limited, we need to focus it in on the right areas. So we're really keen to make sure that we are using the resource that's available, which is unfortunately more limited than I think anyone in the forensic science community would want it to be, but to make sure it's delivering practical tools that are going to support Police Scotland and others to make sure that we're keeping communities in Scotland safe.
Thank you very much indeed. And Fiona, you mentioned the first time that you've recruited apprenticeships, and given the real impact that apprenticeships can make on reducing inequality in society, I think this is incredibly important, particularly in such a science-heavy profession. I wonder if you could say a bit more, if you have any thoughts about the future?
No, thank you, and it really is a fantastic milestone that we've met in bringing apprentices into forensic services. We have a huge ambition around developing our apprenticeship programme, so there is a complete pipeline into a career in forensic science without having gone through a graduate approach and building that qualification. So we want to be able to have a more inclusive organisation, a more diverse organisation, and I think apprenticeships is one of the key ways of doing that. It's absolutely fantastic to have two hugely energetic and passionate people that have joined us, and they're already making a difference. In fact, they shared some of their early experiences through an article for staff, and it really is inspiring. So we want to do more of this. We want to bring more apprenticeships in, and we want to make sure that we've got that good pathway for people to have a really long and enjoyable career in forensic science, but through another route that's different.
Mary.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Fiona. I can tell from your enthusiasm this is something you're very interested in, but my understanding is that this builds on work that you've already been doing over a number of years to allow people to join the service at entry-level jobs and then be developed while they work into professional roles. Could you say a wee bit more about that, please?
No, thank you. And you're absolutely right. One of the key focuses of the new operating model within forensic services was to have far clearer career pathways, and apprenticeships starts us on that journey. I mean, organisational change is really difficult, and I wouldn't want to be overly positive in terms of bringing in a new operating model, a new structure is difficult for the people that are already within the organisation in terms of fitting people into that new pathway. And the results of the staff survey will tell us, I am sure, again, that our staff want to be very clear on career pathways and development opportunities. So there's always a lot more work to do, but it's great to see these new entry-level routes, and we're starting to see people coming into the organisation that are a lot clearer then around how they can develop their career within forensic science.
Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to stop for a short break, and if we could be back for 12:10 prompt, please. I'm now going to, we're on to agenda item 8, and I'll pass over to Sarah Ruffhead for our financial quarterly performance report. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the warm welcome earlier. I'm absolutely delighted to be in position, so thank you. We attached the Q2 financial monitoring report, which shows the year-to-date position to the end of September. I know that we've discussed the report in detail at the Resources Committee, so I intend just to give highlights today. Resource funding, so our total budget for the year is 1.5 billion. The year-to-date position to September was total spend of 737.5 million, which is a 4.5 million net overspend to Q1 financial forecast. This was driven by a 6.2 million amount in additional pay award, increased police officer costs such as overtime and ill health pensions, but then partially offset by non-pay timing variances in the first half and additional income recovery. I'm pleased to say that the full year Q2 forecast is in line with both budget and funding requirements, but I would like to highlight and recognise that there remains to be significant challenges in order to meet that, and those challenges continue around unfunded elements of the pay award, as I said, ill health pensions, overtime, and also liability claims that we are seeing coming through. We forecast this to be offset, however, by increased income, below budgeted police staff numbers, and also one-off benefits from VER and VR. Within the resource funding arena, I'd like to raise just two specific items that we discussed within Resource Committee. The first is with regards latest costs on OPROL and OCLATE across the summer. They totaled 21.3 million and 3.4 million respectively. We continue to closely engage with Scottish Government, and we have some positive news in that we expect this funding through the spring budget review. The second item to highlight is that there is potential for a further pay award with respect to the inflation guarantee that was agreed, and this will not be confirmed until January. So as such, it's not included in our Q2 forecast. However, at current rates, and they are to be confirmed, we assume a further 0.43% uplift, which equates to 5.3 million in funding. We continue again to engage closely with Scottish Government to receive that funding through the SBR, the Spring Budget Review. In terms of capital at Q2, so as a reminder, our total budget was 71 million for the year. As at September year to date, capital was coming in 4.8 million higher than Q1 forecast, and the Q2 full year forecast is 2.1 million over budget. However, I stress that we are expecting that to be fully funded. We've improved the deliverability rating to amber green, and that recognises the significant investment and commitment to date of that budget at 76%, and also the progress as we look sort of year on year, we are significantly ahead of in terms of where we were last year, which is really positive. There remains risk, as ever, with projects to be delivered in half two, and we still have slippage to identify of 5.9 million. However, the momentum is positive, and we're obviously forecasting to come in just over budget, but that is fully funded. Finally, with regards to reform, so our budget was 20.4 million for the year. As at the September year-to-date position, we were 0.4 million under budget, with the Q2 full year forecast showing an overspend of 0.4 million, again fully funded. Deliverability is amber rated. As DCC Smith was speaking to, significant progress has been made, as evidenced by 75% of our budget committed and or spent at the half 2 point. We have recognised and found a significant amount of 15.9 million of the required 16 million slippage required, and we continue to monitor and deliver we continue to monitor delivery closely with the teams, ensuring that clearly the projects that we're continuing create the largest impact for the business. In summary, I would say a positive update with Q2 forecast showing spend and investment in line with budget or fully funded, and we will continue to engage closely with the teams to manage those challenging cost pressures, and also engage with SG on those sort of one-off items that I spoke to.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Anticipating a break-even at the end of the year?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Before I open it up for any questions we may have, I'll pass over to Pauline as Chair of Resources. Any comments?
Sarah, many thanks for that summary update. As I said earlier on, we had a detailed discussion on the Q2 position and the forecast at the recent Resources Committee, and we spent some time discussing those key risks to the year-end outturn position, and Sarah's given a very helpful update in terms of where we currently are. So the position, as Sarah said, is break-even, but we do need confirmation of some of those funding adjustments going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions from board members? No, very thorough and comprehensive. Thank you, Sarah. I'll move on to the budget update, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we have attached in 8.2 two documents. We have Appendix A is a copy of the Chief Constable's pre-budget written evidence to the Parliamentary Committee on the 5th of November. This has been widely shared previously, so I don't intend to speak to this directly today. The second appendix is a copy of the Authority and Police Scotland's budget proposal, which gives detail of the initial budget bid to Scottish Government. And it also contains information with regards to scenario analysis at a very high level, as requested by Scottish Government, and that includes a flat cash scenario. To highlight again, we continue to engage with the authority on budget matters through Resource Committee and also the Budget Development Working Group. If I go through on a very high level, as a reminder, our bid for FY 26-27 was as follows. So we were requesting a resource uplift of 138.6 million, and that's broken down by three different areas. So 25.2 million being a baseline adjustment for the increase in national insurance that we saw this year, and also workforce modernisation. 79.7 million for unavoidable cost pressures. They include the agreed pay award, which Scottish Government are aware of, inflation, committed spends, and the impact on our work of any new legislation. So that totals 104.9 million to, as we say, stand still on this year's position. We've then requested a further 33.7 million for investment into policing to increase officer and staff numbers to deliver our Vision 2030, and also to address that increasing complexity of crime, threat, harm and risk, as articulated by the Chief at the Parliamentary Committee and also here today. Our capital bid for next year is 93.9 million versus the 71 million in the current year, and this will enhance our rolling replacement, our estates master plan, and also transformation projects, particularly across the digital space. We absolutely recognise in our bid the financial challenges faced by the public sector. That's not lost on us. However, our non-pay ratios of 86 to 14%, combined with the reform that we've already undertaken, really makes absorption of any further cost pressures to any degree unachievable. It's very difficult indeed. We continue to closely engage with Scottish Government, and they continue to signal to us to plan for a flat cash scenario plus NI uplift. And that's why we included the flat cash scenario in the pack, and we've been engaging with them on that. We're absolutely clear and have communicated that a balanced budget cannot be delivered under a flat cash scenario, even with immediate recruitment freezes, which would lead to significant operational impacts and a reduction in workforce to below 21,360. We would still have more than 42.7 million to find to get that balanced budget. So it's a significant issue. As I said, we continue to actively engage with ministers and the Scottish Government team on this, and to continue to highlight the priorities within our budget and what risk and harm that addresses. The constraints of annual budgeting, if I may as well, combined with the lack of borrowing powers and rollover of reserves, are becoming increasingly prevalent in this situation. And it's increasingly difficult when we are trying to deliver a significant multi-year investment programme. Again, we will, part of my role will be to pick that up and continue to liaise with ministers, engage with ministers on those issues going forward. To that end as well, I would like to highlight that in earnest, in preparation for next year, we are actively starting to plan and commit across particularly the capital and reform projects ahead of next year in order to make sure that we are continuing sort of business as usual and continuation of projects. So over the coming months, we have a lot of work to do. The 13th of January we'll see our formal allocation for this year, and in that period up to that we will continue to engage on multiple fronts, and we will focus on the detailed budget build from bottom up and also that scenario analysis to get us best prepared as we move into from January onwards. Thank you, Chair.
Sarah, thank you very much for your clarity with that. Chris, anything you want to add?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of points. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Sarah, for that summary of the budget. Just a couple of things, probably. In particular, so taking revenue first. Flat cash, yes, we've had some guidance previously from Scottish Government officials to at least plan for that. I don't think yesterday's budget necessarily gives us any particular clarity around direction of travel. It's quite opaque at this stage, and obviously in time we'll find out a bit more about how that impacts Scottish Government's overall budget and the Justice budget in particular, and hence what impact that might have for us. So that will follow in due course. Just on flat cash, just to kind of reinforce what Sarah was saying there, flat cash would mean probably a budget deficit for 2 whole years, not because of a lack of action on our part, but simply because it's impossible for natural attrition in the absence of compulsory redundancy, for example, to catch up sufficiently to allow us to balance the books. So we've had a balanced budget for, I think, something like four consecutive financial years now. Back in the days when we had a budget deficit, we were consistently subject to a Section 22 by the Auditor General, and that is a situation that I don't think we'd ever want to return to. So from a financial standpoint, flat cash would be a very serious situation for us indeed. So hopefully that's something that we can avoid. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and again it's picking up on one of Sarah's points, that for our capital planning, having a multi-year settlement would be really, really beneficial for us. It's a point that I made at the Justice Committee as well. When you're kind of living hand to mouth, trying to kind of land on a pinhead every single year means that you make decisions about your investments that you wouldn't really want to make. That multi-year certainty, whether that's through simply having that confirmed to us as a multi-year capital grant, or having the facility to carry forward reserves or to borrow, would help smooth out the impact of that. So I think that's another important point. And lastly, and this is something that Sarah and I have just started to talk about, it's surfacing some kind of some medium or longer term financial planning. It's something that I think we would, just to manage expectations, want to start to introduce probably the middle of the next calendar year. Ideally, we would aim to surface something round about the time of the budget, but I just think with the January 13th date, producing something meaningful will probably take an extra few months. So that's something that we want to start to introduce, I think, middle of next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Pauline, anything you want to add from Chair of Resources?
Thanks very much, Chair, and to Sarah and Chris. I mean, I think the papers really highlight why the investment is required, not just to achieve the reform and the 2030 vision, and as we know, Policing has a strong track record of reform in Scotland, but also in terms of that wider criminal justice and public sector reform in line with government priorities. And I think it's clear from what was said earlier on in terms of community policing that investment is a preventative measure too. So I would certainly encourage those discussions around the strong track record of reform and the further reform and investment in policing can make across the outcomes expected in Scotland. I also support the work ongoing around the case for multi-year capital settlements, but also in terms of year-end revenue flexibility as well, so that those investments can be much more strategic in nature, and we can see that coming through in terms of the longer-term financial planning. I completely accept that given the the later UK budget and then subsequent impact in terms of Scottish budget and allocations to public services in Scotland, that might be later in the financial year. There is quite a time lag between now and the 13th of January, though, in terms of when we will get our allocation. And I guess my question is really assurance that we will be continuing to engage with Scottish Government officials in terms of making this case and understanding the impact if it is indeed a flat cash settlement for policing in Scotland.
Chief, you want to come in and then I'll bring Sarah in?
Thank you, Chair. Just some additional points, all of which I made at the Justice Committee a couple of weeks ago. The context is obviously important for us. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice described us as an exemplar of reform yesterday when she was giving evidence, and the questions by the committee were predominantly related to policing. So there was considerable cross-party interest in our bid. I think we have collectively produced something that provides a strong evidence base, identifies the risks of not investing further in policing. It sets the backdrop of the 900 to 1,000 less than when Police Scotland was formed, 700 less police staff. But when set against the work that we've done, we probably stand alone with the exception of fire and rescue across Scotland. I think our bid also speaks directly to the government's priorities around poverty and children, frontline services, reform of frontline services, and I think an investment in this organisation. What you get from that is quite a rapid effect in terms of our ability to keep people safe and the other elements of the vision. And I think on the basis of that, we should be singled out in terms of our proposition and our desire to ensure that we continue to keep the people of Scotland safe and what's required as we operate across both the in-person world and the virtual world. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Tom?
Thanks for that. And I certainly don't want to dilute from the position that the Chief has just expressed, because I totally agree and totally support that position, and also from the Chair of the Resources Committee. We had a State's Master Plan presented to us in the past, and a large element of the funding of that in the future was around capital receipts. We're hearing today that the reform of capital receipts and multi-year planning, that would affect that, is unresolved. And so my question then is, if that's not resolved, does it leave us with a gap in the future funding is it a risk to the State's Master Plan going forward? Because that's money on top of what we as a government ask in terms of budget.
Or Chris, would you want to come in and then I'll bring Sarah in?
Just specifically the capital receipts point, consistently we have been allowed to retain our capital receipts, and I'm certainly hoping there's no reason why that would change, that we would get confirmation when the budget is confirmed. We generally get that. But to your general point, having that certainty over a multi-year horizon would be beneficial, because having to wait year on year to know that you can retain your receipts from disposals is, of course, less than ideal.
Yeah, thanks for that. And being able to keep capital receipts answers part of it, but it's the reform of multi-year retention, because receipts don't necessarily come in to match the spend. So it's the reforms, another part of it, and I want to focus on that risk to us.
Yeah, and that issue's been surfaced in the past as well, because like you say, the timing of disposals very rarely matches with when you actually need the expenditure. So one can only really tackle this if you're planning on a multi-year basis and you have that certainty of what you're going to get, where your receipts are going to come in, and the smoothing effect of having investment up front before the capital receipts are received. It's almost like borrowing the money in advance and then paying it back through the capital receipt. But with a single year settlement, you can't get into that at all.
Okay, Sarah.
Thank you. It's to add that we are very aware of the live issue. Donna, our chief of estates that's working on the master plan, is acutely aware of the issue as well. And so, whilst we work to solve the larger multi-year budget solution, we can only do our best, and it's a live issue that we're aware of in terms of managing that in-year risk and capital receipts, and doing our best in terms of what will be becoming much larger anticipated receipts in future years.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. No other questions? That's great. Thank you, Sarah, for that's very helpful. I'm going to move on to agenda item 9, and I'm delighted that we have our Scottish Biometrics Commissioner here. Brian, we always are known the benefit of having you come here and presenting your annual report and speaking to us, and we obviously welcome that close working relationship and both the challenge and the encouragement that we receive from you and your office. And Cheryl Glenn, you were one of your directors here as well, so you are both very welcome. And with that, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Bear with me, I've got a bit of a cold, but I'll do my best. As always, it's a pleasure to... Excuse me, can you put the microphone, please? Okay, thanks, Chair. As always, it's a pleasure to appear before the board and give an update on the use of biometric data and technologies for policing purposes in Scotland. There's a paper being circulated to board members with relevant hyperlinks to the publications referenced there, and so with the board's permission, I'll just draw a few key points, and that should leave lots of time for questions. You've mentioned that Cheryl is with me today. Cheryl's the new director of my office, so Cheryl basically runs the office. And so I will update the board on activities in the last year, and then I'll turn to Cheryl and ask Cheryl to say a bit about our new strategic plan and our winter work programme. Turning to the first of these themes, in February of this year, we laid our 4th Joint Assurance Review before the Parliament, and this was an assurance review of DNA. The DNA assurance review was conducted in partnership with the Scottish Police Authority and the Leverhulme Institute of Forensic Science, and it highlighted to the Parliament Scotland's world-leading DNA capabilities and the importance that DNA plays in criminal investigations, particularly into more serious crime types. The authority have actually worked with me on 4 out of 6 assurance reviews, including the one that's currently in progress, and I have to say I'm extremely grateful to the authority for the strength of those ongoing strategic relationships. On DNA, we made 7 recommendations as summarised in the covering paper, and I'm pleased to report that excellent progress has been made on all of those recommendations. Then in March of this year, and I should say we were able to lay 2 reports almost at the same time this year, because Police Scotland were very kind enough to second in a detective chief inspector to us, and that gave us additional capacity and capability. So in March we laid our 5th assurance review, and this one was conducted in partnership with HMICS. And it was a review of the retrospective facial search capability within 2 UK policing databases. One, the PND, which is the UK Police National Database, a UK-wide intelligence sharing system, and the other one was the UK Child Abuse Image Database, also known as CADE. Now, I should emphasise to the board that we were only looking at the facial search capability within both of these databases. And members will be aware that PND, it was introduced after the Somme murders, and it plays a massive part in the UK and Scotland in disrupting serious criminality. And CADE, similarly, is a UK-wide database. It has many different functions, and it plays a really significant part in safeguarding children, disrupting criminality, triaging massive volumes of images of child abuse, and it helps to convict dangerous criminals. In relation to PND, I should say that we were unable to establish the scientific reliability of the algorithm. The reason that is important is we know that the new live facial recognition algorithms that are being used by police forces down south have been accredited by the National Physical Science Laboratory as being free from bias. And we also know that the new replacement algorithm for PND, the Home Office Strategic Facial Matcher algorithm, has also been cleared as being free from any bias and discrimination. And the reason I mention this is two reasons. One is that there's going to be a report forthcoming, we think, next week or the week after, on the current database. And this comes against the context of New South Wales Police in Australia having withdrawn that database because it's found to discriminate against ethnic minority groups. But equally, the Scottish Code of Practice actually prohibits the use of any biometric technology which is known to discriminate against a protected characteristic group. So I just wanted to draw that point out because actually the legislative framework in Scotland provides better guardrails than arguably exist in other parts of the UK. And then turning to my annual report for 2024-25, this is my fourth annual report. I've been the Commissioner in Scotland since 2021. And it's probably enough for me to say on the annual report that I acknowledge the difficult financial context in which policing operates. And I also use my report to pay tribute to the many hard-working police officers and forensic scientists who serve our communities in Scotland around the clock, 365 days a year. And we actually have a fantastic police service in Scotland, and we have a world-leading forensic science provider. And it's important that we remember that. We're very lucky in that regard. And then lastly from me, before I turn to Cheryl, last month we laid the first statutory review of our Code of Practice in Parliament. Members will remember that the statutory Code of Practice in Scotland was approved by the Scottish Parliament on the 16th of November 2022, and the legislation requires that once it's 3 years old, it has to be reviewed and a report has to be laid in Parliament. That report was laid, as I say, last month, and I was pleased to report to the Parliament that in the 3 years since the Code has been in existence, there have been no breaches of the Code of Practice in Scotland by Police Scotland, the SPA or the PIRC. And that's actually quite remarkable when you consider that in those 3 years there have been more than 300,000 custody episodes in Scotland, and that since the summer of 2024, every person who is arrested and who has their biometrics taken is given a leaflet which explains to them the reason their data has been taken, what it will be used for, where it will be stored, and it explains the functions of my own office and the functions of the UK Information Commissioner, including how to complain to us if they feel that their data has been used in a way contrary to the Code. And as I advised Parliament, we've had only 4 complaints in 3 years, and none have been substantiated. So a bit of a good news story there, I think. And I'm now going to turn over to Cheryl.
Thank you.
So I'd first like to give you an update on where we are with our strategic plans. This is our second 4-year strategic plan, how we'll discharge our functions over the 1st of December of this year until the 30th of November in 2029. It's Brian's second plan, but unfortunately he won't see it come to full fruition because Brian will deem it office in April of 2029. So any new commissioner will have a 7-month grace period before they have to start developing their strategic plan. Our approach was the same as it's gone before, the tried and tested approach. We consult with our key stakeholders, get their thoughts and comments about the areas that we'll look at. We'll continue to work in partnership, as Brian's mentioned, with our key stakeholders. It's been really effective in how we produce our assurance reviews. The next 4 years will see us looking at fingerprints, forensic imaging, digital forensic technologies and body-worn video. We will also conduct another 2 rounds of our compliance assessments against the Code of Practice, I believe in 2027 and 2029, and we will do a second review of our Code of Practice. We will also publish, hopefully early next year, an outcomes report looking backwards of what we've achieved since we began in 2021. In regards to outcomes, for this strategic plan, we actually worked with Evaluation Support Scotland to develop a logic model and an outcomes framework. We have 4 strategic outcomes, all linked to our 4 strategic priorities. The golden thread, we will be reporting on the outcomes of our work in our annual report and accounts and through performance management as we go throughout the year in our 4-year business plans. One final note on the strategic plan to mention is the review currently being conducted by the Scottish Government into our functions and powers. They will produce the paper in November 2026. I believe the consultation has already begun with our key stakeholders. Some of you may be aware that the Commissioner has stated that he feels our powers are sufficient, but there is an opportunity for our functions, and there has been an opportunity for our functions to be extended to wider than the 3 main policing bodies that we currently work with, to the wider community justice ecosystem in Scotland, so for example prisons. Another area that there's an opportunity for is for this office, the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner, to produce a code of practice into public safety cameras, so public space CCTV. There's no current oversight of that in Scotland, and it would be timely in considering where we are with artificial intelligence and technologies involving face. So moving on to our winter work programme, as Brian's already mentioned, we're currently engaging in our 6th assurance review on fingerprints. And in addition to having the DCI join us, we are now lucky to have a 2-year secondment of a senior fingerprint examiner, who we've now renamed as our subject matter expert, who is on secondment for 2 years up until 2027. We're very grateful to SPA Forensic Services for that, for embracing that opportunity. Karen will bring with her not just a wealth of experience to this fingerprints assurance review, but to all our forensics related assurance reviews going forward. That strengthens our working relationships and opens up those channels for information exchange, which is great. So once again, thanks to all of our partners to continue working with us. We will also commence a consultation on any minor amendments to the Code of Practice over the winter months. And as I mentioned, this is resource dependent and time dependent, but we do hope to produce an outcomes report looking backwards on our first 4-year strategic plan and what we've achieved, but also the outcomes that we've evidenced for the public of Scotland. That's probably going to be based on our 22 recommendations that we've made across our 5 assurance reviews and the review that we did with the Scottish Government into the laws of retention. So, for example, Brian's mentioned there is now a leaflet that's given out in custody. That's also in an easy read version. It's also available on Police Scotland's website in 14 different languages, I believe. Hopefully got that right. But in addition, as a result of the assurance reviews we did in early 2023, Police Scotland did another policy change in regards to children. So less children in Scotland are having their biometrics taken in custody. That pulls us in line with a policy approach across Scotland in regards to the implementation of the UNCRC. So it's a positive news story. So those are the areas that we'll be looking at in regards to outcomes in that outcomes report. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed, both. I have a number of questions, but the Chief Constable, would you like to comment or ask?
A comment, Brian, Cheryl, thank you. Really grateful for the the scrutiny and the assurance that you've provided for us moving forward, and just a comment in terms of expansion of your remit and your powers. We would welcome. There were lots of nods when you talked there about CCTV, and as we use images more, that assurance not only in terms of policing, but broader community safety partners, I think is really valuable in terms of maintaining trust and confidence. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to pass over to Alistair Hay now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Brian and Cheryl. Very informative, and I'm very appreciative of the report that you've just provided. I've got a question, and I think my second one might be more of a statement because you've already touched on the points I had within it. My question was around live facial recognition. The authority recognises the insight and key role you and the Code of Practice play in developing a robust process to develop comprehensive safeguards to support any future deployment of live facial recognition by Police Scotland. I believe you put on record your support for the introduction of primary legislation around the use of LFR. Could you expand on the lawful extent of the current legislative framework and the added benefits that you would see that specific legislation would bring?
Thanks, Alistair. Firstly, I suppose, if I can be clear, there is a legal basis at the moment for the use of live facial recognition in the UK. In Scotland, that would stem from a number of different pieces of legislation, including Section 20 of the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act, so the duty of the police to prevent and detect crime and to protect life. The Scottish Biometrics Commissioners Act, passed by the Parliament in 2020, this legislation was specifically introduced in recognition of the fact that the law can often be a blunt instrument and cannot keep pace with rapid advances in technology. The UK Information Commissioner, not the current Commissioner, the previous one, Elizabeth Denham, in 2019 published an ICO opinion on live facial recognition, stating that it's legal in terms of UK data protection law. And we'll have the Supreme Court in the UK, following the Bridges case, quite clearly stating that the use of live facial recognition by law enforcement in the UK is legal. So it is legal, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. But to come to the second part of your questions, because obviously this can be quite a controversial topic, depending on how and when it's deployed, the advantage that primary legislation would give is that it would expose that legislation to full democratic scrutiny. You know, so it would have to be introduced as a bill, and it would work through the 3 stages of Parliament, and you know, so that would be exposed to full parliamentary debate. Importantly, that would also set guardrails around the use, what it could be used for, what it couldn't be used for, and it would absolutely provide, absolute clarity to the police as well. But to summarise then, there is already a lawful basis for its use. Primary legislation would be useful, but not essential, would be my view.
Thanks very much. I think that's very helpful in the context of the conversation that's ongoing around the potential use of live facial recognition. The second question I had is maybe more of a comment now, because you've touched on this when you were speaking to your paper. It's in relation to Cade FM, and in your report it highlights that 98% of uses the child abuse image database facial matching tool results in no potential intelligence lead. But you know, from previous conversations on this, it's my understanding that the primary use of Cade is to match metadata of thousands of images to ensure officers and investigators' time is spent on more cases and to stop re-traumatising officers by looking at thousands of images that are already in the database. Of the images that aren't matched, facial matching is applied, and that has allowed for the further identification of 2% of these images. There is then a manual review of these images that don't have matching meta data, and facial matching has yielded no results. In the time period in your report, facial matching potentially safeguarded 24 children from further trauma. And I hope that Police Scotland continue to invest in technology like this that is proportionate, it's ethical, and it's legal to identify victims and perpetrators quicker. And I think you explained the context of that when you were speaking to your report earlier.
Yeah, if I can just say a couple of words on Alistair. I mean, you're absolutely right. The UK Child Abuse Image Database has many functions. There's about 12 different modules. It can do about 12 different things. You touched on metadata. Metadata is data about data. You know, so for example, if you're talking about an image of child abuse, what the metadata allows you to know is where that image was taken and on what kind of device, at what time it was taken. It might actually even have some other information that I probably don't need to mention here that will help the police with their inquiries. But this is a massive global problem, child sexual exploitation online. The National Crime Agency in the UK have reported before about 400,000 instances of online access to this sort of material in the UK. So it's a massive, massive issue, and the police are actually enormously successful at removing illegal content from the web through CADE, about disrupting criminality, safeguarding children. So the figures you give, Alistair, are good, but I would suggest that's just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Brian, as always, you come and you enrich our meeting and you enrich our understanding, so thank you very much for being here and for all the work that you do. And Cheryl, thank you very much as well. So thank you both. Thank you. We're going to move on now to agenda item 10, our strategic policing plan, which is here for approval in terms of going out to consultation.
Thanks, Chair. By way of the quickest introduction before passing over to Amanda, just to confirm that the authority has a statutory duty to produce a strategic police plan, which sets out the main objectives for the authority and the policing of Scotland. As part of that statutory duty, there is a requirement to review the SPP every 3 years, and we're now at that point. I'm pleased to say that the team is really using this opportunity to revise our approach to how we do this, to simplify the suite of strategic products that we have, and to align, finally, the respective strategies of Police Scotland, the SPA and Forensic Services. So Amanda's going to take us through some of the detail and ask for your approval today to commence the public consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members. So, as you will be aware, the current strategic police plan, known as the Joint Strategy for Policing, was published in May 2023 following a period of review and refresh, and aligns fully with the Scottish Government's strategic police priorities, which were published in 2019 and reviewed in 2023. As the Chief Executive said, we've taken the opportunity as part of our statutory requirement to review the document to really think about what it should be and what it can be. We've looked at the review of the document through the context of continuous improvement, and we feel that there is an opportunity for us to really set out a much more strategic direction for the policing of Scotland. The refresh gives us an opportunity to improve alignment across the strategic policing landscape in Scotland, and it allows us to connect and map commitments that have been made across the system and streamline the strategic direction that we describe. We took the opportunity to think about what has happened in the strategic landscape and policing in Scotland since the publication in 2023, and we've had some significant documents published in that time within the system. So Police Scotland Vision 2030 and the Forensic Services Strategy 2025 have been published in that time. What we're aiming for is the policing plan to act as a keystone in that landscape, so connecting all of the priorities and commitments that have been made in the constituent plans of the system without describing in significant detail how they should be delivered. We are clear that the core of the strategic policing plan model remains the same, with key strategic outcomes covering crime and public safety, service delivery, partnership working, our own workforce and sustainability, and, as I said, alignment to the government priorities. But this review does allow us to enhance what we have from a document that was probably in previous iterations overly focused on delivery of Police Scotland activity and make it much more about the policing system. We undertook a gap analysis of the existing documents and the current joint strategy, and recognised that the language in our joint strategy for policing 2023 doesn't reflect our current position or our future ambitions around priority areas such as culture and anti-discriminatory practice, trauma-informed policing, support to victims, workplace trauma, frontline community policing, or the role that the policing system has in a whole system approach to improving outcomes. We, to date, have undertaken a process of strategic stakeholder feedback, which is consistent with the process that we followed for the 2023 document. So we've gone out to key partners across the public sector and asked for their feedback on the high-level outcomes. That feedback has been really helpful and has allowed us to reflect some revisions to language based on the feedback from colleagues across Scottish Government, HMICS, Audit Scotland, COSLA and the 32 local authorities in Scotland. And what you see in Appendix A, that the consultation draft of the document reflects that feedback. To be clear, as much as we are presenting today as the authority, the process for the strategic policing plan for Scotland, it is very much a co-authored document. We rely heavily on input from our colleagues in Police Scotland to ensure that it is fit for purpose and it reflects direction. And I think it's important to note the input that we have from the Strategy and Analysis Directorate and ensuring that we get that reach across the entirety of Police Scotland, and also from the Forensic Services Leadership Team in pulling the document together. So if members are content to approve the consultation draft today, we will launch on Monday a period of public consultation on the document and use that feedback to inform the final draft, which will be presented to authority for approval in February of next year.
Amanda, thank you very much indeed. And of course, board members have already seen this in its evolution. So I've got Chris, you're interested in coming in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris and Amanda. And yes, we've already seen it, and I'm certainly content and welcome the progress. I just wanted to alight for a moment on the context, and obviously you refer to the fact that Scottish Government colleagues have confirmed they won't revise the strategic police priorities in advance of the election. However, we have seen a flurry of recent announcements that are relative to this space, particularly around public service reform. There's a very widespread conversation going on conversation going on in the public policy space around the prevention agenda. And so it's just, I guess my question is just around how we strike a balance between ensuring that this consultation now, which is obviously critical with the public, is robust and meaningful, while recognising that an incoming government most likely will want to review strategic policing priorities and the implications of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'm conscious that as part of the engagement exercise that we've undertaken to date, we've had such positive feedback about the direction of travel that we definitely don't want to lose momentum in terms of setting the strategic direction for the policing system. However, as you say, a new government post-election will have a requirement to publish some new strategic policing priorities. We are required through legislation to ensure that our strategic policing plan aligns with those priorities. So we will, of course, work with colleagues in government and undertake a review during the consultation period for the priorities and then post-publication of those, and work with all of our partners to ensure they're fit for purpose. But we certainly feel that the broad strategic direction that we're setting is in line with the strategic context for the public sector in Scotland.
Just
okay.
Add to that.
Yep.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the way that this has been reset in terms of the methodology that's been adopted, I'd like to think that it's more forwards compatible in terms of any sort of future changes that might be made in terms of the government's sort of policing priorities as well. So we've gone from something that was quite detailed and frankly was a big list of things to 5 strategic outcomes that I think really capture what policing's trying to achieve. So hopefully any adjustment we might need to make as a result of the government's priorities changing would be relatively simple to execute. Thanks.
Welcome that and certainly recognise that. Thank you.
So if there are no further questions, can I ask the board to approve this for release for public consultation? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Amanda. Now moving on to agenda item 11 for the SPA governance framework, another report for approval.
Thanks again, Chair. So I'm pleased today to present the outcome of what is our annual review of the authority's corporate governance framework. As you already know, the framework brings together 6 key documents that set out how the authority governs, scrutinises and holds policing to account. We review it every year to ensure that it remains current, effective and accessible. Following some significant updates made last year, particularly to the standing orders, this year's review is more limited in scope, generally speaking, and I'll come to the exceptions in a minute. We undertook a thorough internal assessment, as we always do, informed by the recent committee effectiveness review and feedback from officials, committee chairs, Police Scotland and Forensic Services. I'm pleased to say that overall the framework continues to operate effectively with some minor adjustments proposed this year, and details of these are all included in the report. Most of these updates relate to improving clarity, accessibility and consistency across the documents. A small number of changes are proposed to committee terms of reference to ensure remits are accurately captured. These are all tracked for full transparency in the associated appendices. There are, however, 2 key structural changes proposed to the framework. The first relates to the work of the Policing Together Oversight Group, and just per Tom Halpin's earlier update, it's proposed that the oversight of the Policing Together programme is mainstreamed into the People Committee from the 1st of April next year, reflecting the progress that has been made within this programme of work, and also to support, as also discussed earlier, greater transparency and visibility of that. The second substantive change is the establishment of an Executive Leadership and Remuneration Committee. Now, establishing a remuneration committee reflects best practice across the public sector and provides a single forum for the authority's oversight and scrutiny of remuneration, allowances, personal development and performance management arrangements for executives across Police Scotland, Forensic Services and the authority. It's important to stress that the functions set out in the terms of reference for this committee are responsibilities currently fulfilled by the People Committee, or some of them are actually fulfilled directly by the Chief Executive. Creating this committee seeks to further strengthen the internal controls and build trust and confidence that decisions affecting our executive team are fair, transparent and defensible. So, subject to members' approval today, the updated framework will replace the current version on the authority's website. I'm happy to take any questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And as we've gone along, board members have been involved in the reviewing and reflection. Any comments or questions from board members? So in which case, are we content to approve the change to the governance framework as noted in the paper? Thank you very much indeed. So that concludes our business that's been taken in public. I'm going to pause the live stream for a couple of minutes to allow the live stream to end and our public observers to leave. And just a reminder that everyone at the table who is contributing